Chapter 1. The inciting incidente had scarcely ranged my suitcase in the opulent drawing-room of Brookstock Manor when the most extraordinary thing occurred. The great brass bell in the vestibule, an heirloom said to have accompanied the family's founding ancestor on the voyage from Flanders, was discovered without its clapper, its hollow frame mute and mocking. A bell that could not ring, you understand, to any ordinary observer. A missing clapper might be a mere oddity, but in the world of Hercule Poirot, such an anomaly is the whisper of deep deception. Brookstock Manor sat atop a gentle hill in the Sussex countryside. Its crenellated towers caught, in the amber glow of late afternoon light, Lady Eleanor Carrington, sole heiress of the Carrington estate and lady of the manor, had summoned my dear friend, Monsieur Poirot, to attend the weekend assembly of distinguished guests. As her guests arrived bankers, artists, military men, and a certain celebrated opera singer, the stately hush of the manor was shattered by an uproar in the entrance hall. I arrived just as Lady Eleanor, her white-gloved hand pressed to her heart, was being guided from the vestibule by her butler, Jennings. Her complexion, usually alabaster and composed, was now flushed with shock. "My dear Hastings, the bell," she panted. "Monsieur Poirot, our jewel of reason, must see this at once." At that summons, Poirot emerged from the library with his characteristic perfect posture, mustaches meticulously waxed, eyes glinting with curiosity. He paused at the threshold, surveying the scene with a quiet intensity that seemed to draw every detail into his little grey cells. "Hastings," he said with a courteous nod. "Dear Lady Eleanor, you are upset. Pray calm yourself and show me exactly what has happened." Lady Eleanor led him to the massive bell, its silvery surface dulled by dust. The clapper lay into pieces on the polished marble floor, the slender rod bent like a broken heart, and the rounded striker chipped at its edge. "Last night," she said in a trembling voice, "I asked Jennings to ring the bell at precisely 9 o'clock as a signal for dinner. The bell has rung without fail for generations. This morning, as I prepared for the day, I noticed it had not sounded. When Jennings examined it, he found the clapper destroyed and discarded. There is no sign of forced entry, none of the doors or windows have been tampered with. Yet someone has taken extraordinary measures to silence our bell." Poirot knelt beside the broken remains. He ran a gloved finger along the chipped edge of the striker, then gently touched the bent rod. His brow furrowed, an expression so rare on his refined countenance that I felt a thrill of anticipation. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured. "This fracture is not accidental. It has been deliberately weakened over time. See the tiny notches along the shaft, as though someone has been filing it, ever so slightly, inch by inch." I peered more closely. Indeed, faint rasp marks were visible under the bright light of Poirot's pocket lamp. It was as though the perpetrator had plotted this sabotage meticulously, ensuring that the clapper would snap at a precise moment, perhaps at the dinner bell itself. Meanwhile, the assembled guests pressed against the velvet ropes that cordoned off the vestibule. I recognized Sir Aldous Winthrop, a financier with a reputation for ruthless acquisitions, Lady Beatrice Camden, an actress whose harsh reviews scarcely dimmed her pride, Colonel Montgomery Graves, a retired officer with more medals than friends, and Madame Isidora Velez, the diva whose voice had captivated London's opera houses. Each of them wore an expression of polite concern, though in their eyes there flickered something else, curiosity, perhaps, or the first glimmer of unease. Poirot stood and gestured for Jennings to withdraw the onlookers. "My friends," he said in a gentle but firm voice, "I must request a moment of privacy with Lady Eleanor. I assure you, everything is quite under control." The guests exchanged puzzled glances, but obeyed. The tension seated itself like a living thing among them. as though the very walls of Brookstock Manor were watching. Once the visitors had dispersed, Poirot turned to Lady Eleanor. "You said you heard no ring at 9 o'clock?" he asked. "I did not, monsieur," she replied. "I waited at the dinner table until the servants finally brought coffee instead of opening the doors. It was most irregular." Poirot tapped his temple. "And so, Hastings, we see a plan of psychological sabotage, the hostess's nerves unsettled, the guests perplexed, the entire dinner delayed. But why? To what end?" Jennings, the butler, approached quietly. "If I may, monsieur," he said, "I found this scrap of parchment beneath the velvet carriage bench in the hall. It appears to be a fragment of a letter." Poirot took the parchment. It bore a single, hastily scrawled line, "Speak not of the bell, or all shall fall." The ink was still slightly damp. Poirot's small eyes narrowed. "Someone wishes to intimidate Lady Eleanor, to keep her from mentioning the bell's disappearance. But why such secrecy? And who benefits from fear in this household?" Lady Eleanor's lips quivered. I have received anonymous notes before, monsieur, warning me of certain business dealings. As you know, I inherited the estate only last month after my father's sudden passing. He held investments that some might prefer to see unclaimed. Indeed, Poirot said, a missing clapper and a warning note. Both speak of deliberate installation of dread. But let us not forget the simplest question. By what means was the bell accessed? The vestibule doors are locked from within at night. Only Jennings has the key. Jennings, humble and devoted, shook his head. It is true, monsieur. No one else could enter the vestibule. The key hangs in the butler's pantry. So our suspect list begins. Lady Eleanor, Poirot said softly, not outside intruders, but those within these walls. Now, Hastings, if you will escort me to the guests' quarters, we have interviews to begin. He smiled. That smile, which always made me believe that the most tangled riddles were nothing more than a pleasant diversion dot as I followed him through the lantern-lit corridors. I could not help but glance back at the motionless bell, its silent shell a New Testament. To the unseen hand that sought to sow discord, dinner would be late. Yes, but whether the hour of revelation would come sooner, I could not guess. Only Poirot's unparalleled mind could peel away the layers of pretense that cloaked this curious affair, and so, beneath the wary gaze of Brookstock Manor's ancient portraits, the game was afoot. The bell that would not ring had told its warning, and Hercule Poirot, ever alert to the subtlest of clues, was determined to discern its true meaning. Chapter 2. The first close morning air in Brookstock Manor was cool and still as I joined Poirot in the vestibule. The hushed hush of servants moving about contrasted sharply with the uproar of our discovery last night. Poirot stood beside the silent bell, his expression one of keen concentration, I noted. As always, the precise symmetry of his stance and the inscrutable glint in his eyes. Mon ami, he began softly. We must examine every detail of this scene before it is altered by well-meaning hands. With that, he produced a small magnifying glass from his waistcoat pocket and bent low to inspect the marble floor on the bell. I followed suit. Though my untrained, I saw nothing more than a few faint scarf marks. Poirot tapped a slender finger against one of those scarfs. Observe, Hastings, not so much a scarf as the very imprint of a shoe heel pressed into the marble. Note the pattern, a crescent shape with 3 tiny ridges. Jennings, would you kindly fetch the boot tray and lighting lamp? The butler hurried off. Poirot pointed to a small clump of dust near the threshold. And here, see these minute fragments of wood. They bear the same polish as the bell's interior. Someone removed the clapper and carried it away. Yet these shavings fell as though by negligence. A useful clue, as Jennings returned with the tray and lamp. Poirot moved to the opposite side of the vestibule and studied the walls. Hastings. It is not merely the bell that interests me. Note the faint discoloration on the lower portion of this tapestry, slight smudges, as though a hand brushed against it repeatedly. Let me wager that our saboteur leaned here while working. Seeking to steady themselves in the semi-darkness, I knelt and ran my fingertip across the weave. Indeed, the tapestry's once lustrous threads were dulled by what felt like the residue of polishing wax. I looked up at Poirot. Impressed by the precision of his observation, excellent, Hastings, he said warmly, and to think that most would pay no heed to such a detail. Now, let us consider the implications. The perpetrator worked here over a period of time filing the clapper, then returning later to finish the deed. They might have practiced this, sabotage at odd hours, concealing their work in darkness. But when they returned for the final act, they must have been recognized by Lady Eleanor's household. He beckoned to Jennings. Do you recall how many people had cause to access the vestibule during the night? You said only you and the lady herself hold keys. Jennings bowed. That is correct. Monsieur, Lady Eleanor locked the door at 9 after her dinner guests had departed further. Evening, I then attended to other duties until midnight. At that hour, I retired to my quarters. No one else entered. Poirot's little moustaches twitched with satisfaction. So our suspect pool is exceedingly small. But we must also account for the indirect. Could someone slip through a servant's passage or remain hidden? We shall see. He turned to me. Hastings, would you kindly check the servant passages and ensure no secret door exists that we have? Overlooked. I rose and flanked the vestibule walls, testing each panel for misaligned seams. All seemed unremarkable. As I studied one ornate sideboard, I noticed, tucked beneath its cabriole legs, a single leather glove. I picked it up gingerly. It was of fine kid leather women's size and bore a faint scent of lilac. Returning to Poirot, I handed him the glove. His eyes lit up. The crucial find. A female glove, yet no lady mentioned losing one. And the fragrance. Lilac wool, perhaps containing traces of bergamot. Very distinctive. He sniffed it delicately. Lady Beatrice Camden. You wear lavender eau de cologne with lilac, pray. Was it you who left this behind? At that moment, Lady Beatrice appeared. At the corridor's entrance, impeccably dressed in pale silk, she curtsied. Monsieur Poirot, I beg your pardon, what is amiss? Poirot held out the glove. This belongs to you, Lady Beatrice. She paled, then reached her reticule. From within, she withdrew an identical glove. My other glove, she exclaimed. I thought I'd dropped it in the drawing-room after breakfast, but I found it in my quarters. How curious. Poirot nodded. Curious indeed. Either you lost one glove in the drawing-room and another in the vestibule, or someone placed this here to live. Erratly, it speaks of misdirection. Hastings, the saboteur wishes us to believe a lady passerby is involved. I glanced again at the glove's fingertips. Under the lamp's glow, I spotted a trace of something glistening, a thin smear of wax. It matched the polish residue on the tapestry. Someone wore this glove while filing the clapper. But if Lady Beatrice consistently wears gloves in public, then these gloves would have been removed before dinner. And if she is innocent, the imposter glove belongs to our culprit. Poirot pocketed the glove with a triumphal smile. A brilliant oversight by the guilty party. We shall find more clues in the corridors. Hastings, accompany me to the grand hall. I observed footprints there this morning, foreign footprints, which may lead us to another piece of the puzzle. We stepped into the vest hall. Its marble floor cool beneath our feet, indeed. Near the eastern doorway, a series of footprints traced a path from the vestibule. With his magnifying glass, Poirot measured the impressions. "These are men's boots," he announced. "Gentlemen's brogues, not servant shoes. Note the soles brand. Fairchild and Sons, imported from London. Our perpetrator wears fine footwear." As we followed the boot prints, I thought of the assembled guests. Sir Aldous Winthrop's boots were of the Savile Row variety. Colonel Graves wore sturdy military brogues, and Monsieur Poirot himself preferred delicate slippers for indoor wear. That left Sir Aldous and the Colonel as possibilities, but neither would risk sullying of shoes on polished marble. Poirot halted and pointed to another clue. A faint, reddish stain on the floor. Blood. Hastings. He knelt and examined it with a cloth. Mild abrasions, not or most likely a pinprick from a nail or staple, but the blood belongs to our saboteur, however slight. They scraped their hand while working. I peered through the magnifier and saw the red spot. It was barely a fleck, yet it pulsed with significance. Could that mark have come from the wooden clapper's interior? Possible, Poirot agreed. But it might also have risen from the tapestry's warp, those notches you noticed last night, where the saboteur steadied themselves. His small nail could have nicked the fingertip. He turned to me. "Eyes alight, Hastings, we have uncovered 3 critical clues: the rasped wood shavings, the woman's glove smeared with wax, and now the blood stain. These speak of someone methodically preparing the sabotage. Someone who wore gloves to avoid fingerprints and yet was careless enough to bleed. I should like to question each female guest on her habits and attire last evening, and each servant on any irregular noise they might have heard." Just then, Lady Eleanor entered the hall, accompanied by Colonel Graves. "Monsieur Poirot," she said with forced calm, "I trust you are making progress." "Progress, indeed, Lady Eleanor," Poirot replied, inclining his head, "but I must ask you to remain in the drawing-room with Jennings until my inquiries are complete. You may send tea to be served, for we shall require sustenance." As Lady Eleanor and the Colonel withdrew, I noted Colonel Graves's stiff posture and clenched jaw. He did not glance at the footprints or the glove, but his boot heels were new and spotless. His composure struck me as unwavering, perhaps too unwavering. Yet Poirot said nothing, choosing instead to fold the leather glove carefully into an evidence parcel. We left the scene, our minds busy with possibilities. The morning light streamed through the stained glass windows, illuminating patterns on the marble floor. To any passerby, it was merely a grand hall at Brookstock Manor, but for Poirot and me, every gleam and shadow whispered secrets waiting to be deciphered. Each small detail was a step closer to unveiling the one who would silence the bell, a step closer to discovering motives in the tangled web of human intentions. And so, with our first clues gathered, the mystery deepened. The game was afoot, and Poirot's little grey cells were already hard at work, weaving each fragment into the tapestry of truth. Chapter 3. The gathering of suspects be the afternoon. The drawing-room of Brookstock Manor had assumed the air of a salon-turned-tribunal. Heavy damask drapes shut out the wan afternoon sun, and a low fire crackled in the hearth, lending a flicker of movement to the assembled group. Lady Eleanor Carrington presided from a high-backed chair, her expression composed yet taut. Round her, the suspects took their places on velvet settees and wing-back chairs, each subtly aware of the silent wetness of the others. Monsieur Poirot rose from his own seat, unfolding himself with graceful precision. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I thank you for assembling so promptly. The affair of the bell is not a matter of mere curiosity. It is a deliberate act designed to unsettle Lady Eleanor and, perhaps, to mask a greater crime. I intend to question each of you briefly. Pray answer honestly, for any hesitation may betray more than words." He turned first to Sir Aldous Winthrop, a tall man whose tailored morning coat spoke of banking floors and investment portfolios. Sir Aldous inclined his head. "Monsieur Poirot, I am at your service." "And you, Sir Aldous," Poirot continued, "did you hear or see anything unusual near the vestibule after 9 o'clock last evening?" Sir Aldous's expression remained cool. "I dined in my room. As with my custom, I heard no bell, and thus I dispatched a message to Lady Eleanor's steward to inquire whether dinner would be delayed. That was the extent of my involvement." Poirot made a light note in a slim leather booklet. "Your boots are pristine," he observed politely. "You were not in the vestibule, I take it. Not last night." "No," Sir Aldous replied, checking the cuffs of his sleeves. "I rarely venture beyond the drawing-room after dinner." Next, Poirot turned to Lady Beatrice Camden. Seated with an imperious posture on the settee, the actress's striking visage bore a flicker of unease. "Lady Beatrice," he said softly, "you retire early when rehearsals press. Yet last evening you were present at the dinner table until the shall we say bell's absence was noted. Did you leave abruptly at any time?" She lifted her chin. "I excused myself to powder my nose twice, Monsieur Poirot. Once at 8:30, when I heard a curious scraping sound in the hall, or so I thought, and again after 9, when I found I had lost my glove." She raised a hand, revealing the other glove. "I discovered one missing, but my maid returned it to me shortly after." Poirot's small eyes gleamed. "You heard a scraping sound, you say? The rasping of metal, perhaps?" Beatrice frowned. "It might have been the bell being struck, but the resonance was dull. I cannot be certain." A murmur passed through the room. Poirot inclined his head and spoke to Madame Isidora Velez, the celebrated opera singer, reclining languidly in an armchair. Her eyes, shadowed by kohl, regarded him with theatrical detachment. "Madame Velez, your voice is famous for its clarity. Last evening, did you hear the bells chime?" She chuckled softly. "Mon cher Poirot, I was practicing scales in my suite until 8. I take no recreational dinners. My evening ended with a private recital for Lady Eleanor, after which I retired if the bell failed to ring. I was not present to note it." Poirot's lips curved. "And yet, madame, your gloves were found in the vestibule this morning, unless I mistake." Madame Velez's profile stiffened. "My gloves remained in my dressing-room, monsieur. I would not walk to dinner in white kid gloves. You must have my mistake." At that, Colonel Montgomery Graves shifted in his seat. The retired officer's medals caught the firelight, and he cleared his throat. Poirot turned to him. "Colonel Graves," he said, "you are accustomed to precision and discipline. Your accommodations lie nearest to the vestibule. Did you observe any visitor there after 9? Graves's posture tightened. "I observed nothing, monsieur. After dinner, I walked in the garden to clear my head. I returned in time for coffee, by the west staircase." Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully. "And you wear brogue pattern, no? 12 by Fairchild and Sons." The colonel's eyes flicked to Poirot's notebook. "Indeed. Beautifully crafted boots, I admit, but they see little use in the house." Poirot made another note. "Lastly, I should hear from our servants. May we have Jennings and Miss Everett?" Lady Eleanor signalled to the door, and the butler and housemaid entered. Each curtsied or inclined respectfully. Poirot addressed Miss Everett first, a young woman with alert eyes. "Miss Everett, you assist Madame Velez and Lady Beatrice. Did you notice any disturbance or misplaced items after dinner?" The maid's cheeks coloured. "I dusted the vestibule this morning, monsieur. I found wax shavings, tiny filings, I believe. But I presumed they came from polishing the brass. And the glove found here?" Poirot asked, showing her the fragment. Miss Everett paled. Madame Camden had two pairs. I thought one was misplaced there and brought it back to her dressing-room. Poirot nodded. "Thank you. And Jennings, did you hear from any of the guests that they lost personal items last night?" The butler, ever composed, answered only, "Lady Beatrice's missing glove was reported. I found it upon her dressing-table and returned it at her request." Poirot closed his notebook. "I thank you both. Now, Mzamas," he addressed the suspects again. "We have learned that the saboteur filed the clapper away over time, operated with gloves to conceal fingerprints, and was careless enough to nick a finger. The glove belongs to a lady's size and bears wax residue. Who among you wears gloves to dinner for practical reasons? Lady Beatrice claimed her glove fell in the drawing-room. Madame Valère states her gloves never left her suite. I suspect one of these accounts is false." Tense silence followed. Sir Aldous exchanged a glance with Colonel Graves. Lady Beatrice's fingers tightened on her lap. Madame Valère's jaw was set in a determined line. Poirot stood serenely, eyes alight with anticipation. "But of course," Poirot said at last, "these are early conjectures. We must gather further evidence and examine last night's events in full. For now, let us reconvene at tea to discuss our findings. I shall retire to reflect on what I have heard. In the meantime, I advise all of you to remain within the mansion. No guest may leave until dinner this evening, so that all may be accounted for." Lady Eleanor inclined her head in agreement. The suspects dispersed to various corners of the room, each returning to the small rituals of polite society, sipping tea, straightening cushions, adjusting gloves, yet none daring to speak. The tension in the air was palpable, as though the very walls awaited confession. Poirot turned to me as the others departed. "Hastings, my friend, we have assembled our cast upon the stage. Each has motive and means, but only one has left the fingerprint concealed beneath wax of culpability. Let us retire to the library. I shall reflect upon their lies, their gestures, and their contradictions. The truth will emerge inch by inch, as dawn follows night." With that, we left the drawing-room, stepping beneath the watchful portraits of Brookstock Manor's ancestors. The silent bell loomed behind us, the heart of our mystery, its hollow frame echoing secrets that only Poirot's little grey cells could unlock. Chapter 4. Poirot's reflection. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall mullioned windows of Brookstock Manor's library, illuminating rows of leather-bound volumes and lending a warm glow to the heavy oak panels. I found Monsieur Poirot ensconced in an armchair near the fire, hands clasped behind his head, eyes half closed in contemplation. A low murmur of the crackling hearth and the soft ticking of a grandfather clock were the only sounds in the room. "Mon ami," Poirot greeted me without opening his eyes. "You have done admirably to assist with the initial sweep." He stroked his moustaches. "Now comes the work of the mind. Let us review our facts." I seated myself opposite him, drawing out my small notebook. "We know the bell's clapper was filed over time, then broken deliberately. A lady's glove with wax residue was found. Rasped shavings and a faint bloodstain at the vestibule, and brogue print footprints leading into the grand hall." Poirot nodded. "Precisely, and from those facts, certain deductions follow. The saboteur required extended access in darkness, thus familiarity with the household's routines. Gloves were worn to conceal identity, yet the glove itself bore evidence of use. And, Hastings, consider this. Why target the bell? What significance does its silence bear?" I thought for a moment. To unsettle Lady Eleanor and her guests. Perhaps delay dinner, sow confusion. "Ah, but confusion to what end?" Poirot murmured. "The purpose must serve a deeper motive, perhaps to mask another act that would occur at the dinner hour." And seen amid the distraction, a knock at the door interrupted us. Jennings entered. bearing a silver tray with 2 cups of tea and Perret's force. He ranged them and bowed. "Monsieur, Lady Eleanor requests your presence in the drawing-room at once. She grows anxious for news." Poirot rose, folding his hands behind him. "Merci, Jennings. Stay within call, and send Miss Everett if needed." He took a cup of tea and inhaled its fragrant steam. "Hastings, before we proceed, let us test a hypothesis. If the saboteur meant to commit another misdeed under cover of delay, what opportunity might present itself at the dinner table? I consider the seating plan, recalled the guests' positions. Lady Eleanor at the head, Colonel Graves to her right, Sir Aldous opposite, Lady Beatrice beside Sir Aldous, Madame Velez at the foot. Exactly, Poirot said. Note the proximity of Sir Aldous to Lady Eleanor's safe, which holds her late father's papers. Could the saboteur have taken advantage of distracted servants to remove or alter documents? Or perhaps to swap? Oh well. He tapped the rim of his teacup. And who among our suspects would most benefit from such an outcome? Sir Aldous's interests in the estate had been whispered about in banking circles. He stood to gain from a revision of Lady Eleanor's inheritance. Colonel Graves held no legal claim, but an old grudge against the Carringtons might have driven him to malicious nuisance. Lady Beatrice's agitation seemed more theatrical. Madame Velez cared little for legal affairs, yet any could have motive. Poirot set down his cup and smiled. But let us not leap to conclusions. Instead, we shall confront Lady Eleanor with our suspicions and see how she reacts. If she appears protective of her father's papers, that may confirm our theory. We followed Jennings through the corridor to the drawing-room, where Lady Eleanor awaited, her hands folded in her lap, her calm composure masked in a turmoil. "Madame," Poirot began gently, "we have discovered evidence suggesting that last evening's delay may have concealed a second act. Might you permit me to examine the contents of your father's safe?" Her eyes widened. "My safe? Why, of course. But, monsieur, I assure you, nothing is missing." Poirot inclined his head. "We shall see." He turned to Jennings. "Fetch the key from your pantry, Hastings." "If you would light the lamp near the safe." The butler retrieved the key while I placed a lamp on the small table beside the ornate metal safe embedded in the wall. Its door swung open with a soft click. Inside lay neatly arranged ledgers, sealed envelopes, and 2 mahogany boxes. Poirot gently slid out the small boxes. One contained documents circled in ink. The other held a sealed letter addressed to Lady Eleanor. He lifted the letter and examined its seal wax crest bearing the family emblem. "Pray read this aloud." Lady Eleanor, with trembling fingers, she broke the seal and read, "To my dearest daughter, should you discover this letter, know that I have entrusted you with our future. Beware the hand that would see your rightful place usurped. Trust no one but the one who saved you once before." She looked up, tears glistening. "My father wrote this before his death. I was to open it only in dire circumstances." Poirot touched her arm consolingly. "You see, Hastings, the saboteur sought to distract while removing or replacing these items. Yet they overlooked this letter, for they were unaware of its hiding place." He inspected the sealed envelopes in the other box. "These are family documents, deeds, wills, marriage contracts. They all appear untouched." He paused over one envelope, comparing its seal to his memory. "Hastings. Note the imperfection here, a tiny fissure in the wax. Someone resealed it after prying it open. Look." I knelt to examine the wax. Indeed, a minute crack ran across the crest. The edges of the seal were uneven, suggesting it had been broken and reset. Lady Eleanor gasped. "I never noticed," she exclaimed. "My steward always ensures the seals are perfect." Poirot nodded gravely. Someone with knowledge of your safe's contents and location. Someone who expected no one to look so closely. He closed the safe door gently. We have therefore confirmed the second act. This saboteur tampered with your documents, likely to gain advantage. Now, Hastings, our next step is to confront the person most likely to benefit from any alteration, a person with both motive and means. Lady Eleanor sank into her chair. Who could it be? Poirot drew a small notebook. We shall begin with Sir Aldous Winthrop. As a financier with a keen interest in your estate, he had motive to adjust your inheritance. I propose we speak with him directly, in his private sitting room, and observe his reaction. He stood and offered his hand to Lady Eleanor. Madam, you may remain here. Hastings and I will return shortly. I suggest you summon your guests for an early dinner hour. Interviews must not be observed by others. Jennings bowed and left, to carry the letter and extracts to Lady Eleanor's desk. Poirot and I retraced our steps to Sir Aldous' sitting room, wondering what truths might surface when the financier alone faced scrutiny. As we passed the grand portrait of Lord Carrington in the corridor, I sensed the gravity of the situation deepen. The silent bell had tolled twice, first to unsettle, then to distract. Now its chilling echo resonated in every corridor of Brookstock Manor, announcing that the true crime lay not in the vestibule but in the hearts of those gathered, and as always, it was left to Hercule Poirot to discern the hidden chords of human nature if it would bring the culprit to light. Chapter 5. Initial interviews. Dinner had been called early, but the grand dining room at Brookstock Manor remained empty of its customary warmth. Sir Aldous Winthrop's fine china sat in perfect alignment. Crystal goblets glimmered in the chandelier's candlelight, and the long mahogany table stretched invitingly beneath the vaulted ceiling. Yet no guest dared to take their seat until Monsieur Poirot had completed his private inquiries. I found Poirot standing by the sideboard, surveying the room with a practised eye. His moustaches twitched in anticipation. Hastings, we must proceed swiftly. The first interview shall be with Sir Aldous. He believes himself above suspicion, but in truth, it is precisely his confidence we must unsettle. Sir Aldous entered, his polished boots echoing on the marble floor. He inclined his head politely. Monsieur Poirot, you wished to see me, indeed. Sir Aldous, Poirot replied, beckoning to a chair near the window. Pray be seated. Once Sir Aldous was settled, Poirot began with his trademark gentle courtesy. You are aware that last evening your footsteps were detected near the vestibule and again in the hall. Sir Aldous's expression remained composed. I walked there after my message to the steward was sent. I wished to see if dinner might commence. Poirot nodded, but allowed only a moment's pause before continuing. You also profess little interest in the family documents housed within Lady Eleanor's safe. Yet you stand to benefit most from any revision of her inheritance. Is that correct? Sir Aldous's lips twitched ever so slightly. I admit my profession involves financial matters pertaining to estates, but I assure you, monsieur, my only concern here has been the welfare of Lady Eleanor and her household. Poirot's eyes sparkled, a commendable concern, and yet he reached into his coat and produced a small leather case. Would you recognize these? Sir Aldous glanced at the case, then at Poirot's face. His posture stiffened. That is my seal stamp. I misplaced it last night. Poirot opened the case to reveal a signet ring and an ivory-handled seal. Sir Aldous's color rose. I use it to authenticate financial documents. I carried it here in case Lady Eleanor might require urgent transactions. Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully. And did you use it yesterday? Sir Aldous's gaze flicked away. No, I did not. But someone did, Poirot said softly. For the wax seal on one envelope in the safe bore an impression identical to yours, but the fissure in its crest shows that the seal was applied after the document was meddled with." He allowed the silence to linger. "Sir Aldous, did you examine Lady Eleanor's documents after dinner?" Sir Aldous drew a slow breath. "I admit," he said, "I paused by her study to speak with my legal counsel on the telephone, but I never entered the safe's chamber." Poirot's brow arched. "Yet your seal stamp was found missing for a time, and you were seen near the vestibule. To curious coincidences, Sir Aldous's jaw set. You imply I tampered with Lady Eleanor's inheritance. I assure you, monsieur, I had no reason, nor would I risk such a breach of trust." Poirot closed the case and slid it into his pocket. "We shall see. Sir Aldous, pray return to the dining room. We shall call you when your inquiry is complete." With a courteous nod, Sir Aldous departed, leaving Poirot to turn to me. "My friend, he is rattled but not broken. We must pursue another line of questioning. Let us interview Lady Beatrice in the gallery." We ascended the grand staircase to the portrait gallery, where the walls were lined with oil paintings of Brookstock's ancestors. Lady Beatrice stood before a canvas depicting a lady of the 18th century, her pale silk gown shimmering in the lamplight. "Madame," Poirot said, "you mentioned hearing a scraping sound at 8:30. Might you describe it further?" Lady Beatrice's fingers trembled around the silken drapery of her skirt. It was like metal on metal, a soft, rhythmic rasping. I thought perhaps a servant was polishing the banisters. I rose to see, but the corridor was empty save for shadows. Poirot nodded, and yet the rasping marks on the bell's clapper were made by such filing. You would recognize that sound. She lowered her gaze. Yes, and I apologize, I should have mentioned it sooner. But I feared suspicion would fall upon me if I spoke of such a thing. Poirot's small eyes gleamed. Suspicion, indeed. Yet the presence of your glove in the vestibule suggests someone wished to implicate you. Tell me, Lady Beatrice, did you at any moment remove your gloves in the hallway?" She swallowed. "I removed them to check my nails in the drawing-room mirror. Then I replaced them before dinner. I did not venture beyond the drawing-room afterward." Poirot's moustaches quivered. "And Miss Everett claimed to have retrieved your glove from the vestibule and returned it to you. Yet you said nothing to your maid, fearing it would alarm Lady Eleanor." "Indeed," Lady Beatrice admitted. "I thought it safer to remain silent. Silence can be complicity," Poirot observed. "But I believe you are telling the truth about your whereabouts still. You were present when the second act occurred, the tampering of the safe. How do you explain that?" She pressed her gloved hand to her heart. "I did not enter the study at all after breakfast. I was in the drawing-room rehearsing lines until the scraped letter slipped under my door. When I read it, speak not of the bell, or all shall fall. I felt such dread that I did not dare move from my chair." Poirot gave a small smile. "Fear can be a powerful deterrent. You insinuate that the saboteur wielded this note to intimidate you as well." Lady Beatrice nodded, cheeks flushed. "Yes. I believe the same person who filed the clapper wrote that note. They knew how easily I might be thrown off balance, an actress at heart." "Very well," Poirot said. "We shall place you under nominal observation. For now, I thank you, madame." She curtsied and left, her silk skirts whispering against the marble floor. As we descended to the east wing, Poirot remarked, "Each suspect has offered an explanation that fits the facts, and yet each has motive. Sir Aldous for financial gain, Lady Beatrice to conceal her fear, and still the bloodstain remains unexplained. We must interview a final suspect before reconvening for a dinner." That afternoon, we spoke with Colonel Montgomery Graves in his study, a room dominated by military regalia and trophies of past campaigns. The colonel's demeanor was Stoic as he heard Poirot recap the evidence. "Colonel," Poirot said, "you have admitted walking the garden, returning by the west staircase, yet your boots bear no trace of earth or dew." The colonel's brow furrowed. "I cleaned them upon re-entering. It is not uncommon for an officer to maintain his appearance." "True," Poirot conceded, "but it is curious you would polish boots between your walk and coffee time, when your attention would be best on your own rest." He studied the colonel's medals. "You served in India. Yes, you would be familiar with soaking humidity and persistent perspiration." The colonel's lips thinned. "I was, and you wear a military glove on your left hand," Poirot continued, holding up the glove from the vestibule, the one identical to Lady Beatrice's. "Except for its size. Yet this glove is too small for you. Did you handle it?" The colonel stared. "I have no interest in ladies' gloves." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Perhaps. But you knew the filaments of the tapestry were to brace yourself when filing the clapper. You carried small tools concealed, and you disliked Lady Eleanor's late father's investments, which you deemed unsound." The colonel rose, rigid with indignation. "I will not be slandered, monsieur. I may have disagreed with the late Mr. Carrington, but I would not sully myself with sabotage." Poirot inclined his head. "Understood. Colonel, you may rejoin our party." The colonel departed with a stiff salute. Once alone in the corridor, Poirot turned to me. "Hastings, our interviews have revealed motives and methods, but not the culprit. We have financial incentive, emotional fear, and ideological resentment. The missing link remains the bloodstain. Whoever bled however slightly revealed themselves. We must revisit the vestibule tonight. When darkness returns," I nodded, bracing for the next phase. "And what of the seal stamp?" "A distraction," Poirot said, "to draw our attention to Sir Ollis." Yet the true tampering and the only unreserved act was the filing of the clapper and the resealing of Th. E document envelope, I suspect. One of our suspects underestimated the importance of gloves entirely. Tonight, Hastings, we return to the scene, and then, perhaps, the final piece will fall into place. Chapter 6. The first false lead night had fallen like a velvet curtain over Brookstock Manor, and the corridors were hushed except for the faint echo of our footsteps. Poirot and I crept down the east wing toward the vestibule, lantern in hand, resolved to revisit the scene of the Belle's sabotage under cover of darkness. The house seemed different at this hour, its grand spaces transformed into shadowed passages where every creak and sigh spoke of hidden purpose. "Mon ami," Poirot whispered, "we must observe without disturbing, by comparing what we see now with our daytime investigation. We may catch the saboteur in the act, or at least confirm the true sequence of events." I nodded. Heart pounding, as we approached the vestibule door, Poirot unlocked it with Jennings's duplicate key, and the door swung open to reveal the silent Belle bathed in pale lantern light. Poirot's eyes glittered as he knelt beside the clapper's broken remains. "Notice. Hastings," he murmured, "the shavings here are more abundant than yesterday. Someone returned this evening to continue their work." He pointed to fresh rust marks on the rim, deep and more irregular, a clumsy hand, perhaps, no longer careful to conceal every detail. I ran my gloved finger over the marks. "You think our culprit came back tonight?" "Precisely." "Now look at these footprints." Poirot swept his gaze across the floor and held the lantern low. Dozens of crescent-heeled impressions trailed toward the grand hall, but one isolated boot print stood a part deeper, as though bearing more weight. That print was made more recently. Note the sharper edges, the glitter of fresh marble dust. I studied it. "But it's the same Fairchild brogue pattern as before." "Yes," Poirot said, rising. "Yet the depth tells us something. The saboteur walks slowly, deliberately, perhaps pausing to listen. We must follow this trace. We tiptoed after the prince into the grand hall, where a shaft of moonlight slanted through the stained glass window. Poirot knelt beside the newest print. Here is my theory. The saboteur returned to finish the work, anticipating that the hush of night would conceal their task. But someone must have surprised them. He turned, lantern raised, and I nearly jumped at the figure standing at the far end of the hall, Lady Beatrice Camden, her gloves removed, her pale gown almost luminescent in the moonlight. She stared at us with wide eyes, a faint smudge of wax across her fingers. Lady Beatrice, Poirot exclaimed softly. "What brings you here at this hour?" She gasped and clutched at her throat. I could not sleep. I heard a scraping sound and thought it might be the bell again. She lifted her hands. "I came to see if someone was at it. I meant no wrong." Poirot's little grey cells seemed to whirl. He pointed to the wax smudge. "But this is the very wax residue found upon the glove in the vestibule. Pray explain." She pressed trembling lips together. I wore gloves when I rehearsed in the gallery, as the draughts chill me. I tried to remove wax from my fingers after I touched the candle's knuffer. That is all." Poirot inclined his head graciously. "An intriguing explanation, madam. Yet why did you not report the scraping before? Why remove your gloves and linger here in secret? I feared I would be accused." She whispered, "When I read the note, I thought someone threatened me as well. I did not know whom to trust." At that, Poirot gestured for me to step forward. Under the lantern's glow I examined the wax on Lady Beatrice's fingertips. It was indeed from a candle soft, pliable, and aromatic with beeswax, unlike the hard, polished wax from the clapper's filings. I noted the difference at once. "Excellent." "Hastings," Poirot murmured. He bowed to Lady Beatrice. "Madam, I thank you for your candour, but we must continue our investigation. Pray, return to your rooms until dawn." She curtsied and hurried away, her silhouette vanishing into the corridor. Poirot turned to me, expression grave. "A false lead. Mon ami. Our suspect appeared in the act. Yet the evidence contradicts her story. The wax on her fingers is not the same as that on the glove." I exhaled with relief. So she is innocent of tonight's sabotage, but not of everything, Poirot said quietly. Yet to pin this crime upon her would be folly. No, Hastings, we must look elsewhere. We resumed our examination of the hall, and Poirot's lantern illuminated another clue. A single glove lying near the eastern doorway, identical to the one we found earlier but smeared this time, not with wax, but with a faint trace of blood. Poirot picked it up and handed it to me. "Note the difference," he whispered. "This blood is older, dried, and faint. The saboteur nicks themselves when firing. That glove saved them from leaving fingerprints, but did not spare them from injury." I nodded, inspecting the fabric. The cut must be small, yet enough to bleed. Poirot returned the glove to the vestibule, and we continued to trace the trail back to the bell. There, he paused. "Hastings, do you recall the tapestry smudges?" I bent to the floor where the colored threads brushed the marble. "Yes, distinctive. Wax and polish residue." Poirot knelt and placed a hand on the tapestry's lower border. "The saboteur leaned here, exactly as I predicted. But note these fresh marks." He held the lantern to reveal newly tarnished threads. "Someone else handled the tapestry this evening." I frowned. "Who would secure the velvet after the work was done?" "The butler, Jennings," Poirot said. "He polishes all brass and checks the tapestries each night. He may have disturbed the scene before we came, but that would be normal." I protested. "True," Poirot agreed. "Yet if Jennings moved evidence unwittingly, he could obscure our understanding of the culprit's process." He rose thoughtfully. We have one more test, the safe. If the saboteur returned to reseal the envelope a second time a backup plan, they would need fresh wax and possibly the seal stamp. We slipped to Lady Eleanor's study and found the safe's door slightly ajar, as though someone had reopened it. Poirot cracked it open fully and removed the box containing the documents. He examined the seals under the lamplight. Fascinating, he murmured. The fissure we noted is whitened now, and the imprint less crisp. Someone has resealed it a second time, perhaps to confuse us into thinking the first resealing was the sole act. I pointed to the desk, where an ivory-handled seal lay beside a puddle of hardened wax, the seal stamp. Poirot, he lifted the ring and seal, studying it. Yes, Sir Aldous' seal. Once more within reach of suspect hands. Yet I find something peculiar. The wax here is mixed with another substance, perhaps candle wax from the drawing room. Our saboteur dipped the seal into common wax, not the purer sealing wax used by Sir Aldous. They faked the impression, I said, so the saboteur resealed the envelope, hoping to point the finger at Sir Aldous. Exactly, Poirot said with a satisfied nod. But in their haste, they used the wrong wax, and thus our first false lead emerges. Sir Aldous may appear guilty, yet the evidence betrays the true culprit, someone clever enough to steal the seal, but careless enough to substitute materials. He handed me the seal and stepped back. We must allow the toy soldiers of suspicion to march for a time. Let the household believe we are closing in on Sir Aldous. The real saboteur will reveal themselves either by panic or by daring another move. With that, Poirot replaced the documents, closed the safe, and locked it. Come, Hastings, let us return to the drawing room. Dawn approaches, and soon I shall call for our guests to assemble once more. The bell may yet ring before the truth is laid bare. As we retraced our steps, I marvelled at Poirot's ingenuity, how each red herring, each planted clue, was woven into a larger tapestry of deception. The night had provided a false lead, but it also illuminated the saboteurs' next steps, and I knew that with one more careful observation, Poirot's little grey cells would fall upon the genuine culprit at last. Chapter 7. The psychological gamut. Morning light had barely begun to filter through the heavy drapes when Lady Eleanor summoned her guests to the drawing room once more. Despite the late hour of their interviews, every seat was claimed, and a tense expectancy filled the air. Servants flitted about, offering tea and biscuits, but no one touched them. Eyes darted among the assembled group. Sir Aldous Winthrop, rigid and formal, Lady Beatrice Cameron, cheeks still pale, Colonel Graves, impassive as ever, and Madame Isidora Velez, whose cold-rimmed eyes seemed to watch everyone, but reveal nothing. Monsieur Poirot entered with his customary precision, moustaches impeccably waxed, and took his place beside Lady Eleanor's high-backed chair. He raised a small hand to still the hum of whispered speculation. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, voice soft but carrying, we have traversed a path of clues and misdirection. Now, I propose a little psychological exercise. Permit me to present a scenario, and I shall ask each of you to react candidly. Your responses will reveal much about your character and, perhaps, about your involvement in events at Brookstock Manor. He turned first to Sir Aldous. Imagine, Sir Aldous, that last night the bell failed to ring not by sabotage but through accident, a defective clapper that weakened and snapped spontaneously. No malice, merely ill fortune. How would you feel toward the person responsible for its upkeep? Sir Aldous' brow furrowed. I would be annoyed, certainly, but I would accept Lady Eleanor's assurances that it was unintended. One cannot ascribe intent where none exists. Poirot inclined his head, an admirable restraint. Yet if you believed the caretaker negligent, would you perhaps demand recompense? Sir Aldous' lips tightened. I would insure the cost. A repair was borne by the responsible party. But beyond that, no. Poirot smiled thinly. Thank you. He turned to Lady Beatrice. And you, Madam, if you were told that your glove, so vital to your performance, had been deliberately misplaced to unsettle you, but you later discovered it lost by chance, how would you react? Lady Beatrice crossed arms. I would feel embarrassed and humiliated, but I would accept it as an unfortunate oversight. It would not inspire suspicion of deliberate malice unless other signs appeared. Poirot's eyes danced. Interesting. He looked at Colonel Graves. Colonel, if you learned that a will had been altered without the testator's knowledge, an act that could deprive an heir of their birthright, would you consider this a crime of passion or calculation? The colonel's posture stiffened. Calculation, unquestionably. Passion fades. Calculation endures. Such an act is premeditated, and its author must face justice. Poirot's gaze lingered on the colonel before moving to Madame Velez. Madam, you are accustomed to intense scrutiny. If you found a threatening note slipped under your door, a note warning you speak not of bell, or all shall fall, would you feel fear or anger? Madame Velez placed a painted fingertip to her lips. Fear, at first, but anger would swiftly follow. No one threatens me with impunity. Poirot folded his hands. Now, imagine you discover that the very person you suspected of this act is, in fact, your closest confidant. How would that revelation affect your trust? A tense silence fell. Sir Aldous glanced at Lady Beatrice. She met his gaze and then looked away. Colonel Graves's jaw clenched. Madame Velez's eyelashes fluttered as if to mask her unease. Poirot leaned forward, voice lowered. You see, Samus, deception is often born not of malice alone, but of trust betrayed, and trust, once broken, colors all perceptions. He paused, letting his words settle like stones in still water. Then, turning to Lady Eleanor, he said, Madam, would you share with us why you choose to entrust your late father's papers to this household and to these guests? Why bring together those who might envy your inheritance? Lady Eleanor inhaled, composure wavering. My father believed that only through transparency could his legacy endure. He invited those he deemed loyal and those he suspected to ensure the truth emerged untainted. Poirot nodded approvingly. A brilliant gambit, and yet it is precisely among these loyal souls that danger lurks. He rose and moved to the center of the room, gaze sweeping the faces before him. I have found that when people are placed under pressure, they reveal themselves in subtle ways through hesitation, through the flicker of an eye, through an offhand comment. He approached Sir Aldous. Sir Aldous, you spoke of annoyance at defective objects. Yet last night, you did not merely observe the bell sounds. You approached the vestibule twice. Why? Sir Aldous swallowed. I wished to confirm that dinner would not be indefinitely delayed. Perhaps, Poirot said gently, but your steps left impressions deeper than any others. You bear weight. Yes, but do you bear a heavier conscience? Sir Aldous's face reddened. He glanced at the others, then lowered his eyes. Poirot shifted to Lady Beatrice. Madam, you claim to have heard rasping, yet when pressed, you admitted fear kept you silent. Fear is a powerful motivator. It can compel one to extremes. Lady Beatrice pressed her lips together, shoulders rigid, but offered no retort. The colonel looked on with hawk-like intensity. Poirot turned to him. Colonel Graves, you disdain passion in crime. Yet passion blinds. When one feels wronged, one may believe retribution just. Would you not agree? The colonel's steady voice trembled ever so slightly. I would condemn such an act, but I would understand its genesis. Poirot's head cocked. Understanding does not excuse. Moaned Colonel. Finally, he regarded Madame Velez and you. Diva of the stage, are you so secure in your world that you cannot imagine vulnerability? Her lips parted as though to speak, then closed. Poirot returned to the center of the group, folding his hands. Each of you has responded truthfully, yet truth reveals us in fragments. I have watched your faces, your gestures. I have noted who avoided direct eye contact when the bell's silence was likened to betrayal, and who stiffened at mention of altered wills. For the psychological game has begun, and one among you is already ensnared in its net. He raised his hand, stopping all breath. Tonight, the game deepens. I invite you all to dine together once more, this time with a new appreciation for the stakes involved. Observe one another, listen for slips of the tongue, and guard your own hearts. The final act draws near, and those who play false will find their masks slipping away. As the guests rose, muttered behind gloved hands, I saw in Poirot's eyes a spark of triumph. The psychological traps were set, and the pawns moved themselves. The bell might still lie silent, but in its place a new sound echoed through Brokestock Manor, the sound of suspicion turning inward, of minds turning against each other under the weight of doubt. And in that moment, I knew that Poirot's greatest weapon was not logic alone, but the gentle art of provocation, of reading the human soul and coaxing its secrets into the open. The mystery deepened, and the psychological game was fully underway. Chapter 8. A secondary mistrelate that evening. With the household still reeling from Monsieur Poirot's pointed psychological exercise, Brokestock Manor settled into an uneasy quiet. The grand dining room lay undisturbed, chairs pushed back from the table as though abandoned mid-conversation. In the hall, the silent bell stood sentinel, its empty throat a reminder of the palpable tension among the guests. Servants moved about with hushed urgency, delivering trays and extinguishing lamps. Yet as midnight approached, a fresh disturbance shattered the uneasy calm. I was in the library, assisting Poirot with arranging his notes, when a tremulous knock sounded at the door. Lady Eleanor entered, her white dress softly rustling, eyes wide with alarm. Monsieur Poirot, she breathed. I fear something dreadful has occurred. Poirot set aside his papers and rose. Explain, madam. Lady Eleanor's hand shook as she held out a small sealed envelope. Its paper was creased and smudged. This was on my desk when I returned from the drawing-room. I did not leave any correspondence there tonight. He took the envelope and examined it beneath the lamplight. The seal bore the Carrington crest, but its edges were foul, as though torn and crudely resealed. Poirot broke the seal gently and drew out the single sheet within. He scanned its contents with rapid eyes, and then handed it back to Lady Eleanor, who stared at the parchment in disbelief. The will has vanished. The final testament lies now in hands unworthy. Seek if you dare, but know that each minute lost brings peril to bloodline and legacy alike. A hush fell. Lady Eleanor gasped. My final will was kept here, in this very study. Without it, my inheritance may pass into unknown hands. Poirot's brow furrowed. This is more than simple intimidation. Whoever stole the will has acted to unsettle you, yet with far graver intent than silencing a bell. I stepped forward. But, monsieur, if the saboteur replaced that letter with one of their making, the original will must be concealed somewhere. Indeed, Poirot agreed. And note, the thief knew precisely where to look. A crime within a crime. The vault remains secure. Yet this crucial document is gone. We have a secondary mystery. He turned to Lady Eleanor. Have any of the guests been here since dinner? She shook her head. No one was admitted without Jennings's presence. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Then we shall begin anew. Hastings, fetch Jennings and Miss Everett. We must secure the room and gather statements. I hurried to summon Jennings, who appeared within moments, composed but concerned. Miss Everett followed, her eyes flickering with apprehension. Poirot guided them to the study. Jennings, he said, please list everyone who entered this room in the past 12 hours. Noting the time and purpose, the butler cleared his throat. This morning, Lady Eleanor signed documents here at midday. I delivered luncheon menus. After dinner, I showed Monsieur Winthrop to Lady Eleanor's desk when he requested the seal for his stamp. He glanced at Sir Aldous, who stood just outside the doorway. Then, after your interviews, the room was empty until I returned to extinguish the lamps at 10. And Miss Everett, Poirot asked, did you deliver any letters here tonight, Miss? Everett shook her head. Only the note that I found under the vestibule bench delivered to Lady Beatrice. Not here. She hesitated. I did see Madame Velez pass by the door after retiring to her suite. Poirot's small eyes narrowed. What time was this? Round 9:30, she replied. She went to fetch a glass of water or so I assumed. Madame Velez, standing in the adjoining corridor, stiffened. Poirot inclined his head and addressed her. Madam, were you in the study at this hour? I was not, monsieur, she said smoothly. I rested in my suite. If Jennings did not enter, neither did I. Poirot turned to Sir Aldous. And you, Sir Aldous, did you request any documents here after dinner? Sir Aldous swallowed. I indeed came to fetch my seal. Under Lady Eleanor's permission, I returned the seal promptly and left. Poirot paused, reflecting. So all present deny entry except for the butler's mention of you. Sir Aldous, yet the note of theft bears a seal I cannot recognize. Whoever offered it sought to mislead by using the family crest, but handled it roughly. He moved to the fireplace, retrieving a pair of small metal tongs. With them, he gingerly lifted a scrap of parchment from the hearth's ashes a charred, corner bearing the tip of an inked flourish. He held it aloft, the flickering lamplight dancing on its blackened edge. Observe, he said, this fragment matches the handwriting on the theft notice. Someone attempted to burn the original letter after copying its script, no doubt to prevent forensic comparison. But they lacked the patience to consume it fully. I peered at the scrap. So the thief drafted this note, left it in the study, and then tried to destroy evidence. Precisely, Poirot said. Their haste betrayed them. Now, Hastings, we must consider motive. The removal of the will suggests someone who stands to gain directly or indirectly. Who among our guests listens keenly for a misstep? Whose fortune hinges on Lady Eleanor's estate? He paused, glancing at each suspect in turn. Sir Aldous' expression was guarded. Lady Beatrice's worry was genuine. Colonel Graves's stoicism held a flicker of tension. Madame Velez remained enigmatic behind her kohl-rimmed gaze. Yet we must also recall the original crime. Poirot continued. The Belle's sabotage was personal. Intended to undermine confidence and delay dinner. Act of distraction. Now, the theft carries stakes beyond discomfort. The perpetrator combined psychological intimidation with targeted larceny. Lady Eleanor's voice trembled. Can you recover the will, monsieur? Poirot laid a calm hand on her. We shall endeavour to do so, madam. But first, I must question each guest separately about any knowledge of your will's contents, its unique phrasing or special clauses. Such details could betray familiarity beyond mere curiosity. He turned to the group. Tonight, you shall remain in your rooms. At dawn, I will interview you in turn. Until then, the study is sealed. Jennings moved to lock the door, and Miss Everett placed a do not disturb sign upon it. Poirot then invited Lady Eleanor to return to her suite, accompanied by Jennings, while he and I left to plan the next moves. Once in the corridor, Poirot spoke softly. Hastings, the secondary mystery reframes our inquiry. No longer do we seek only the saboteur of the bell. We now hunt a purloiner of wills. The same hand may have performed both tasks. Or two conspirators may be at work. I considered the evidence, the bloodstain, the glove, the false seal. These point to one culprit. But stealing a will requires access to the study and knowledge of its location. Exactly, Poirot said, and who among our suspects understood the study's layout, who walked its corridors with familiarity. He paused, then smiled. We must now look to those whose confidence in the household would permit discreet entry, the person who blends seamlessly into the nightly routines. He folded his arms. Tomorrow, Hastings, we will interview each suspect about the will's peculiarities. But tonight, I have work to do. I intend to review the household logs and examine any drafts of the will, perhaps the notary's copy lodged in London. The truth lies in comparison of details. The more a suspect knows of unique clauses, the more likely they are culpable. I nodded, ready to assist, as we walked back toward the library. The manor almost seemed to hold its breath. The bell still stood silent, but now another silence hovered over the study, a silence presaging confession or confrontation. The secondary mystery had deepened the intrigue, and Poirot's little grey cells thrummed with purpose, drawing him ever closer to unmasking the mastermind behind both crimes. Chapter 9. Hidden connections. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of Brookstock Manor as I joined Poirot at the breakfast table. The air was heavy with unsaid tension. The theft of Lady Eleanor's will had sharpened everyone's nerves to a razor's edge, while Lady Eleanor ate little more than a morsel of toast. Poirot reclined in his chair, steepling his fingers and contemplating me with those keen little grey cells. Hastings, he said quietly, today we delve into the hidden connections among our suspects. Each relationship may reveal motives entwined by circumstance and history. We must uncover bonds that link one to the other and to Lady Eleanor's fate. I nodded, setting aside my tea. The studio remains sealed. Yes, and the guests await your questions, indeed. He pushed back his chair. Let us begin with Sir Aldous Winthrop. He claims only professional interest. Yet I learned last night that he once lent a substantial sum to your late Mr. Carrington, collateralized by estate shares. The debts were repaid swiftly, but rumor has it that Sir Aldous harbored resentment over the arrangement. We shall see what he says when confronted. We found Sir Aldous in the gallery, studying portraits of Brookstock's ancestors. His face was calm, but his fingers tapped the frame of a gold-embossed painting. Sir Aldous, Poirot began, you were once creditor to Lady Eleanor's father. Pray remind me of the terms. Sir Aldous drew a breath. It was a short-term loan. He required liquidity for a business venture. I provided the funds, secured against a minor share of his property. He repaid in full, with generous interest. Poirot inclined his head, and yet, when the venture failed, it was Lady Eleanor who bore the brunt of the collateral. She inherited a tidy estate, but one still subject to mortgage until I intervened. Sir Aldous's gaze flickered. I did nothing improper, monsieur. My role was merely that of financier. True, Poirot agreed. But did you not, at one point, express to Lady Beatrice that such dealings were unsavoury? He paused, watching Sir Aldous's reaction. Sir Aldous's lips tightened. Lady Beatrice was mistaken. I spoke of corporate ethics, not personal animus. Poirot nodded slowly. Very well. I thank you. He turned away, though I saw the slightest flush on Sir Aldous's cheeks. As we walked to the drawing-room, Poirot murmured, note how he avoided mention of the overheard conversation with Lady Beatrice. Connections between suspects may hide in casual remarks. Lady Beatrice sat by the window, tracing patterns in the lace of her gloves. She looked up as we entered. "Madam," Poirot said, "you recalled hearing a scraping sound at 8:30. Yet further inquiry reveals you and Sir Aldous share an acquaintance. You both attended the Royal Academy gathering last spring. You discussed art sales and investments. How well do you know one another?" Lady Beatrice started. We exchanged pleasantries. Yes, but only as society requires. I did not know of his role in Lady Eleanor's finances. Poirot's moustaches quivered. Yet that discussion went beyond pleasantries. I understand. You spoke of purchasing an antique bronze relief at auction, and Sir Aldous offered to facilitate your bid. Beatrice's cheeks went pink. True. He was helpful, but it was hardly a deep alliance. Just business courtesy. Business courtesy can become business leverage, Poirot observed. He let the silence linger before moving on. "Thank you. Madam," we proceeded to Colonel Graves's suite, where the retired officer polished a ceremonial sabre. His medals gleamed. "Colonel," Poirot said, "you served alongside Lady Eleanor's father in India. You fought at the siege of Mazar-i-Sharif together. Your camaraderie was noted in dispatches. Yet I also learned of a severe disagreement. You had over strategic oversight a dispute that ended with your forced transfer. Tell me of it." The colonel's face darkened. "It was a matter of principle, monsieur. I believed his tactics risked civilian lives. He would not listen. I resigned my position rather than compromise my ethics." Poirot inclined his head. "Ethics are rare currency in warfare." Yet that conflict seeded resentment. Did it not? The colonel's voice was low, perhaps, but I hold no ill will toward Lady Eleanor. I respect her father's memory. Respect is a noble sentiment. Poirot said, but resentment need not be acknowledged openly to poison the heart. He paused, watching the colonel's stoic features soften for a moment before Steele returned. "I thank you." Finally, we found Madame Isidore Velez in her boudoir, seated before a gilt mirror, adjusting a crimson plume in her hair. "Madame Velez," Poirot began, "you performed a private recital for Lady Eleanor last evening, showcasing a rare aria from Donizetti. I understand that the aria held special significance for Lady Eleanor's late mother, who adored your voice. Yet I also discovered that the rights to that aria's sheet music were contested by the composers, estate which Lady Eleanor's father had declined to purchase. Tell me of this." Madame Velez's eyes glinted with a nuance. "My fee was modest, and I cared little for contracts. Yet Lady Eleanor requested the performance. Her mother's memory deserved it." Poirot traced the edge of a music score. "Even so, you benefited professionally. The performance was reviewed in the Gazette, praising your interpretation. The publicity increased your bookings tenfold." He studied her calmly. "Madam, did you consider that replacing gratitude with recompense might affect your generosity?" She drew a deep breath. "I did not perform for publicity. But I admit I did not refuse the review." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Thank you. You may rest." As we reconvened in the library, Poirot paced before the fire. Hastings. "Note the threads we have uncovered. Sir Aldous' financial leverage, Lady Beatrice's social dealings, Colonel Graves's ideological rift, Madame Velez's professional gratitude. Each link binds a suspect to Lady Eleanor's family, binding them to opportunity, motive, and access." I leaned forward. "But which connection points directly to the stolen will and the sabotage bell?" Poirot paused, fingertips lightly brushing his moustaches. "Recall the wording of the stolen note. It spoke of peril to bloodline and legacy. Who among our suspects stands to reshape the legacy most drastically?" I considered. Sir Aldous could reap financial reward, but Lady Beatrice's relationship was purely social. Colonel Graves held no claim, and Madame Velez's gain was intangible. Yet Poirot raised an eyebrow. Precisely. Only Sir Aldous and Lady Beatrice possess practical stakes, but Lady Beatrice lacks the technical knowledge to breach a safe. Sir Aldous admitted to retrieving his seal, but our tests showed his seal was faked. Who, then, had both technical familiarity and personal motive? He drew a breath. Hastings, think of the household's inner workings. Who maintains the safe, the study, the vestibule routines? I frown. The butler, Jennings, and his maid, Miss Everett. Exactly. Poirot said, eyes bright. Our suspects had motive, but only the servants had the unobserved access. Yet we cannot suspect without cause. We must trace connections between Jennings or Miss Everett and the primary suspects. He beckoned me to the servants' quarters. There, we found Jennings polishing silverware in silence. Miss Everett sewing in a corner. Poirot stood before them, composed and respectful. Jennings, he said, you have served the Carringtons for 15 years. You know their routines and secrets. Pray tell, have you ever confided household details to any guest? Jennings's expression was solemn. I am bound by loyalty, monsieur. I have shared nothing but tea and pleasantries. Poirot inclined his head. And you? Miss Everett, do you have family at Brookstock, or relations among our guests? Miss Everett's eyes widened. My sister was governess here until last year. She left under unclear circumstances, invited to relocate by Sir Aldous Winthrop. Jennings's hand trembled as he set down the silver tray. Miss Everett was uneasy about that, monsieur. Her sister left abruptly. Poirot's moustaches twitched. So Sir Aldous once employed Miss Everett's sister, building a connection to the household. You may have visited her sister at his London home. Miss Everett lowered her gaze. Once. But I rarely left Brookstock. Poirot turned to me. Hastings, we see now that Sir Aldous's reach extended into the staff's lives. Yet motive remains with him only insofar as he manipulated those connections. However, consider Lady Beatrice's artistic circle. She introduced Madame Velez to the Carringtons. Madame served as a mediator between Lady Beatrice and the family. He held up a hand. Thus, we observe a web. Lady Beatrice to Madame Velez to Lady Eleanor, Sir Aldous to Jennings to Miss Everett, Colonel Graves to Lady Eleanor through shared history. Our hidden connections form a lattice, but the strongest link is that which touches both Bell and Will intimate knowledge of the house's mechanisms. That belongs to Jennings. Jennings stiffened but said nothing. Poirot regarded him with quiet intensity. Jennings, you alone could slip into the vestibule unnoticed, handle the bell's clapper, and enter the study at will. You alone understood the lock's design. And you could reseal the safe with ease. Yet you had motive not only to delay dinner, but to reshape the inheritance your loyalty forbade concealing ambition. Jennings bowed his head. Monsieur, I served the family faithfully, but when Lady Eleanor's father died, I feared for my position. Sir Aldous offered me security or pension in exchange for discreet services. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And thus, you assaulted the bell to distract, then stole the will to cement Sir Aldous's advantage. You believed no one would suspect an honest butler. Miss Everett gasped, stepping forward. Jennings, how could you? Jennings's voice broke. I did it for Lady Eleanor's own good, so that Sir Aldous would protect her estate. But I lost my way. Poirot nodded, satisfaction shining in his eyes. And now, we have revealed the hidden connections, the threads that bound staff to guest, service to scheme. Justice may proceed. As Jennings was led away by the constable, summoned discreetly, I realized how perfectly Poirot had unearthed the lattice of relationships that concealed the saboteur's path. In the tangled web of loyalties and debts, the truth lay hidden until the masterful unraveling by Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue that same afternoon. The household of Brookstock Manor lay under a tense hush. Lady Eleanor, still reeling from the theft of her will, confined herself to the drawing-room with Jennings at her side, while servants moved quietly through the corridors, avoiding our scrutiny. I found Poirot in the library once more, seated behind a small writing desk, his ever-present notebook open before him. His posture was pensive, and he tapped a slender finger against his lips. "Hastings," he murmured, "I have discovered something so subtle that if I spoke of it now, our suspects would vanish their guilt in a heartbeat, and yet we must use it to our advantage." I leaned forward. "What have you found?" "Mon ami," he drew from his pocket a nearly invisible scrap of paper, the charred corner of the theft notice. Under the lamplight, I saw tiny ridges where ink had cracked unevenly. "Observe these cracks," Poirot said softly. "They are not random. They follow a familiar pattern I have seen only once before on the letter Madame Velez penned last night to Lady Eleanor, requesting her mother's favourite aria. Compare the flourish on this G with that G on Madame Velez's stationery." He slid the scrap across to me. I compared it to the neat lines from Madame Velez's letter we had on record. The loops and slants were unmistakably alike. The same graceful swing, the identical upward tick at the tail. Madame Velez's handwriting. I breathed. Poirot nodded, eyes shining. "Yes, you see. Hastings, how thieves sought to mislead us, by crafting a counterfeit seal of Sir Aldous and by using household intrigue to deflect suspicion. But this scrap betrays her true hand. Only someone who wrote both the theft notice and the recital invitation could leave this signature." "Flourish." I stared, amazed. "And she burned the rest so we would not compare handwriting." "Precisely. A clever ruse, but she did not account for the individuality of her script. Now, we must withhold this knowledge. If any suspect notices us eyeing Madame Velez with unusual interest, the game is up." He folded the scrap into an envelope. "The time has come to set our trap. Tonight, we shall invite our suspects to recreate their alibis, one by one, in the study where the will was stolen. And I shall watch for the slightest tremor when I mention that aria her own request to perform it. Should unnerve her." I nodded. "And the bell." "We'll remain silent for now," Poirot said, rising. "The bell's silence distracted us long enough. Now, the truth shall ring out loudest in Madame Velez's conscience. Let us prepare the questioning." At dusk, the suspects were summoned to the study room, still sealed until this moment. Lady Eleanor, regal yet anxious, awaited us by the fireplace. Poirot greeted each guest with his customary courtesy, directing them to chairs placed round the central rug where the safe had once stood. Madame Velez entered last, gliding forward in silk and pearls. Her composure was flawless, yet I caught the faintest hitch in her breath as she passed the grand piano in the corn-ran instrument she had used to rehearse the Donizetti aria. Poirot sat beside her and addressed the group. "Mesdames et messieurs, I have asked you here to verify once more the events surrounding last night's misdeeds. I shall question each of you in turn. Pray speak truthfully, for only truth can unweave this web of deception." He turned first to Sir Aldous Winthrop, then Lady Beatrice, then Colonel Graves. Each gave their alibi without hesitation. When it came to Madame Velez, Poirot gave a slight nod. "Madame," he said, voice gentle, "you wrote to Lady Eleanor last evening requesting permission to perform her mother's favourite aria. Il dolce suono. You delivered that letter, personally, after dinner, then retired for the night." He paused. "Tell us again why you insisted on performing that particular piece in this house." Madame Velez's lips curved into a practised smile. "Monsieur Poirot, that aria carried special meaning for Lady Eleanor's mother. It was her last public performance before passing. I wanted to honor her memory." "Of course," Poirot said. Yet you used the same stationery and fountain pen to craft a threatening notice. The will has vanished. The final testament lies now in hands unworthy. A curious juxtaposition of devotion and menace. Her composure flickered for a moment. Her hand tightened on her fan. I do not understand. Poirot leaned forward. Perhaps, madam, you will explain why your handwriting matches the charred theft notes flourish. You burned the evidence, but one scrap remains, if you will permit. He produced the sealed envelope containing the scrap. The room grew still. Madame Velez paled as she recognized her own script. Aye, she faltered, eyes glistening. I never meant to. It was to frighten Sir Aldous to force him to protect Lady Eleanor's inheritance. I thought if he believed danger lurked here, he would ensure her safety. Poirot's voice was calm. You played upon fear as you once played upon an audience. But this was no performance, this was a crime. You sabotaged the bell to delay dinner, and then stole the will to secure Sir Aldous' promise of protection. Madam, Velez buried her face in her hands. I only wanted to help. I thought I was wrong. Poirot nodded to Lady Eleanor. Madam, you have your will. He stood and addressed the others. I thank you all for your cooperation. This concludes our inquiries. As Madame Velez was gently escorted from the room, Poirot turned to me. Mon ami, justice need not be harsh when the culprit confesses willingly. The bell's silence has finally given voice to the truth. He placed his hand on Lady Eleanor's shoulder. And now, let us restore both bell and legacy to their rightful place. Outside the study window, the first star of evening glimmered an ephemeral promise that light overcomes darkness, and that the little Bracels, when guided by precision and compassion, can illuminate even the darkest schemes. Chapter 11. Tensions. Rise in the wake of Madame Velez's tearful confession. Brookstock Manor throbbed with an easy energy. The drawing-room, normally a haven of decorum and civility, had transformed into a tribunal of raw emotion. Lady Eleanor sat at one end of the long settee, her face pale but resolute. To her left stood Sir Aldous Winthrop, jaw clenched, guilt and relief warring in his expression. Across them, Colonel Graves leaned against a gilded pillar, arms folded, and Lady Beatrice Camden fanned herself with trembling fingers. I remained with Monsieur Poirot in the background, ready to observe the shifting currents among the assembled group. Poirot rose and cleared his throat. Mesdames et messieurs, I thank you for bearing witness to the resolution of our immediate mysteries, yet I perceive that fresh tensions have risen. Let us address them openly, so that all may understand what has transpired and what remains at stake. At his words, Lady Beatrice spoke first, voice quavering. Monsieur Poirot, how could I have been so blind? I trusted Madame Velez as a friend, and Sir Aldous I depended on your judgment to protect Lady Eleanor's interests instead. I find my confidences betrayed on every side. Sir Aldous lifted his gaze to Lady Beatrice. Beatrice, I never asked Madame Velez to do more than caution me. The theft of the will was her initiative, not mine. Yet I take responsibility for the trust I placed in her. Lady Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. Trust, how precarious it seems now. I suspect none of you, yet I fear all of you, Colonel. Graves stepped forward. Lady Beatrice, I understand your anger, but let us not forget that you, too, withheld your own fears. You heard rasping in the night, yet chose silence. All of us share some burden of omission. Her gasp of indignation mingled with a stifled sob. Sir Aldous put a hand to her shoulder, but she pulled away. The air crackled with hurt and reproach. Poirot raised a slender hand to quiet the rising voices. Justice, my friends, is not solely the capture of a criminal. It is the restoration of trust. Each of you has suffered betrayal. Each bears responsibility for both action and inaction. He turned to Colonel Graves. Moan, Colonel, You spoke of calculation and passion in crime. Yet passion, once inflamed, can compel even the most disciplined soul to extremes. Do you not feel for Lady Beatrice's hurt, for Lady Eleanor's vulnerability? The colonel inclined his head. I do. But I also recognize that Emmy, Velez's actions endangered the estate and our host's peace of mind. Poirot nodded. And you, Sir Aldous, though your hands were not directly stained with theft, you facilitated this betrayal by misjudging Madame Velez's motives. He looked to Lady Eleanor. Madam, you entrusted your household and your heart to these individuals. What do you wish of them now? Lady Eleanor rose, dignity reclaiming her features. Monsieur Poirot, I asked you here to uncover the truth, and you have done so with remarkable skill. I now ask that each of my guests forgive one another and recommit to fellowship. My father's legacy was one of transparency and unity. Let U.S. honor that. A hush followed, as if the very walls of Brookstock Manor awaited a reply. Lady Beatrice curtsied stiffly. Sir Aldous bowed his head. Colonel Graves offered a curt nod. The fragile bonds of trust began to retrace their paths. Thread by cautious thread, Poirot allowed the moment to linger, then spoke gently. Very well. We have unearthed hidden motives and exposed false alliances. Yet the final task remains, the restoration of order. We must ensure that no further mischief is afoot. He turned to the assembled Sir and Jennings, having been reinstated under careful supervision, and Miss Everett, who stood respectfully at the fringes of the room. Jennings, ensure the study is reclaimed and the vault's lock reinforced beyond tampering. Miss Everett, oversee the fixtures in the vestibule. We cannot allow old wounds to fester. The butler and maid inclined in unison, their faces grave, but cooperative. Poirot then bowed to Lady Eleanor. Madam, may I suggest that the first sound of the bell ring tonight be your signal to dine with hope restored? A faint smile touched Lady Eleanor's lips. Yes, Monsieur Poirot, let the bell ring tonight. As the others filed out to attend to various duties, Sir Aldous paused by Lady Eleanor's side. He offered her a slight, contrite bow. My lady, I am sorry for the pain I have caused. I remain at your service. She inclined her head. Yes, Ernest, thank you. Sir Aldous, let us begin anew. Colonel Graves and Lady Beatrice exchanged a brief nod of reconciliation before parting ways. The manor's atmosphere felt lighter, as though a storm had passed and left calm in its wake. Poirot and I remained alone in the drawing-room. He regarded me with quiet satisfaction. Hastings, the tensions have risen and found their outlet in confession and contrition. The household's equilibrium is restored if only tenuously. All that remains is the final gathering. When the bell shall ring once more, and the drama concludes, I exhaled, feeling the weight lift slightly, and the next step, Poirot folded his hands behind his back. Preparations for the final assembly. Mon ami, tonight at 7. We shall convene in the hall. The bell will sound 2 clearings, signaling not only the resumption of dinner, at the end of intrigue. Then, in that moment of clarity, I shall reveal the lessons learned and the human truths uncovered. He smiled, that familiar, triumphant smile. Until then, Hastings, let us ready ourselves to witness the final act, for in the stillness after tension, the true harmony of justice and understanding emerges. Together, we left the drawing-room, footsteps echoing down corridors now promising peace. Outside, the day's last light waned, yet within Brookstock Manor a brighter illumination glowed, proof that even the deepest suspicions can give way to compassion, and that the bell, once silent, would soon ring in renewal. Chapter 12. The confrontation's late afternoon sun had faded to a soft glow as Lady Eleanor summoned her remaining guests to the library. The long, Narrow room lined with volumes of family histories and bound journals felt charged with anticipation. Only Sir Aldous Winthrop and Colonel Graves remained free. Lady Beatrice watched anxiously from a corner, and Jennings and Miss Everett lingered respectfully by the door. At the head of the room, Hercule Poirot stood, hands clasped behind his back, his expression calm yet resolute. "Msamus," Poirot began, his voice steady. "We have traversed a labyrinth of clues. The Bell's sabotage, the theft of the will, the hidden connections among us, and the dual conspiracies that nearly unraveled this house. Now, I ask your attention for the final confrontation." He paused and produced a small umber vial. "Inside this vial is wax from Sir Aldous' seal untainted, pure sealing wax, used for official documents." He then held up a second vial. "And here's candle wax scrape from the vestibule tapestry mixed with the wax used to counterfeit Sir Aldous' seal on the resealed envelope." Sir Aldous' eyes narrowed. "Monsieur Poirot, I fail to see." Poirot raised a finger. "Please, allow me to continue." He laid the vials on a side table, then turned to Lady Beatrice. "We learned that Madame Velez forged the family crest and penned the threatening note, using stationery identical to her recital invitation. Her confession cleared her of other crimes, but left unanswered the question of who directed her actions." He turned his gaze to Jennings. "And we discovered that you, Jennings, performed the Bell sabotage under Sir Aldous' instructions, filed the clapper to delay dinner, then planted the false seal impression to implicate Sir Aldous himself. Your confession revealed a fear for your own security, yet you claimed to act for Lady Eleanor's good." Jennings bowed his head. "I served loyally, monsieur. I was misled." "Misled, yes, by the promises of Sir Aldous," Poirot said crisply. "Sir Aldous, you instructed Jennings to remove the will as well, though you tried to distance yourself by claiming only Madame Velez should know. Yet your hand betrays you." Sir Aldous stood straighter, anger and panic flickering across his features. "Monsieur Poirot, these are outrageous accusations. I sought only to discreetly protect Lady Eleanor's estate from unfavorable revisions by distant creditors." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Let us test that assertion." He gestured to Colonel Graves, who stepped forward carrying Sir Aldous' seal stamp, handed over by Jennings upon rest. Poirot dabbed a bit of the candle wax onto the seal's face and pressed it gently onto a scrap of parchment. The imprint was faint, irregular. "Notice," Poirot said, "how the impression lacks the crispness of unadulterated sealing wax. It matches precisely the counterfeit impressions we found on Lady Eleanor's envelope." He held it out for Sir Aldous to see, and here, he lifted the vial of pure wax, "is how your seal should appear." Sir Aldous staggered, glancing between the two impressions. I cannot explain that." Poirot advanced, voice soft but unyielding. "You coerced Jennings into sabotaging the Bell to distract from the safe's breach. You enlisted Madame Velez, whose fragile loyalty you exploited to pen the threat that would compel Jennings to act. You believed that by remaining behind the scenes, you could secure Lady Eleanor's assets without dirtying your own hands." Sir Aldous' face went pale. He looked to Lady Eleanor, voice trembling. "My dear friend, I did this for you. I thought—" Lady Eleanor's eyes flashed with hurt. "From me. You undermined every one of my guests, questioned my servant's integrity, and nearly destroyed the very legacy I wished to preserve." She turned to Poirot. "Is this true, monsieur?" Poirot inclined his head gravely. "I am afraid so." Lady Eleanor would from my dossier confirm that Sir Aldous had private access to the vault key, had the seal stamp secreted here under Jennings's care, and held clandestine meetings with Madame Velez before orchestrating the theft. Colonel Graves stepped forward. "Sir Aldous Winthrop, as a man of honor, you should have approached me or any disinterested counsel to advise you. Instead you betrayed the trust of this household. Sir Aldous' shoulders slumped. He sighed, defeat in his voice. I was afraid the estate would be squandered by greedy lawyers and distant relatives. I thought I could guide Lady Eleanor gently, ensure the will-favoured prudent stewardship. Lady Beatrice moved to stand beside him, her voice trembling. Aldous, love does not justify deceit. You blinded yourself with intention and forgot the means. He bowed his head, tears in his eyes. I see that now. Poirot stepped to Lady Eleanor's side. Madam, your legacy is restored. Your will be reassembled and reinstated tonight. The bell once, silent shouting to herald a new era of transparency. He rang a small handbell from his pocket. Its clear note echoed through the library, the first true chime since the affair began. The sound seemed to lift the room's heaviness, carrying relief and resolution. Sir Aldous approached Lady Eleanor. My deepest apologies. My dear friend, I beg your forgiveness. She studied him with a steady gaze. Forgiveness, yes, but trust must be rebuilt. She placed a hand on his arm. Let us begin. Poirot surveyed the group with satisfaction. Samus, the confrontation is complete. Deeds have been confessed, motives laid bare. Only through such truth can we move forward. He turned to me. Hastings, the little grey cells have triumphed once more. I smiled. Indeed. Monsieur, the final piece is falling into place. As the guests departed to prepare for a proper dinner with the true bell now restored to its rightful voice, the hush of the library became a testament to the power of confession, reconciliation, and the meticulous art of detection. The confrontation had unveiled the guilty, healed old wounds, and paved the way for justice and restoration at Brookstock Manor. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape the hush that followed the restored chime of the bell lingered like a herald breath throughout Brookstock Manor. In the glow of the library's gas lamps, Lady Eleanor and her guests prepared for the evening meal. Their earlier tension softened into tentative civility. Servants laid the final settings in the dining room, and a fragrant aroma of roast and freshly baked bread drifted through the corridors. All seemed calm, yet beneath that calm, a final tremor of fear awaited its moment. Monsieur Poirot reclined in an armchair by the hearth, hands folded behind his head. Eyes closed briefly in satisfaction, I stood beside him, reflecting on the revelations of Sir Aldous' confession and Madame Velez's tearful apology. The will had been recovered, the bell had rung true, and guests had renewed their pledges of loyalty, yet Poirot's little grey cells never rested. Hastings, he said quietly, our work is almost done, but let us not forget that guilt may drive one to last acts of desperation. We must ensure no evidence remains unrecovered, no accomplice remains at large. I nodded, scanning the room. Lady Eleanor sat with Sir Aldous, who spoke in hushed tones. Colonel Graves and Lady Beatrice conversed in muted relief. Jennings and Miss Everett hovered near the door, faces drawn but composed. All seemed accounted for. Come, Poirot said, rising smoothly. Let us inspect the study once more, especially the places we might have overlooked in our earlier sweep. We exited the library and retraced our steps to the study. Its door, now unlocked and lamps lit. The air inside was warm, carrying the faint scent of wax and ash from our previous endeavours. Poirot moved directly to the fireplace, where he knelt to examine the ashes in the hearth. See here, Hastings, he murmured, the charred fragments have shifted since last I inspected them. He tapped a small heap of soot with a gloved finger, sending a swirl of dust into the air. Someone has attempted to remove what remained of the incriminating scrap. I peered closely and noted among the fine ashes a tiny glint of unburned paper fibers. The thief has returned. Then perhaps To destroy the final piece of evidence, Poirot rose, his posture alert. Yes, and we must act swiftly. If they flee or succeed, the last links in our chain of proof could vanish. He turned to me. Hastings, I propose we stand guard here, while Lady Eleanor secures the outside entrances. Any entrance used by our culprit may be fresh yet. I stationed myself near the door, keen eyes on the faint footprints in the rug. Poirot moved to the writing desk, inspecting each drawer's lock and noting where a letter opener lay undisturbed. Moments passed in dim silence, and then, a soft click from the fireplace. I stiffened. Poirot, still at the desk, tensed as well. From behind the hearth's cast-iron screen, the handle of the secret panel protruded. A slender gloved hand emerged, pushing the panel slowly aside. The shadow of a man slipped through it in an instant. Poirot sprang forward, his cane raised in a lightning arc. Stop, he commanded. The figure of trembling Jennings froze, 1 foot still in the hidden passage. His uniform jacket was half unbuttoned, and a folded parchment bulged in his hand. Jennings. Lady Eleanor's voice echoed from the corridor. She stood at the doorway, face pale but resolute behind Poirot. The butler's eyes brimmed with guilt. I couldn't bear to see the scrap remain, monsieur. I sought to destroy it to spare Lady Eleanor further pain, and I needed to retrieve the original will, hidden behind this panel, to deliver it to Sir Aldous by midnight. His voice cracked. I thought I was protecting you, madam, but I see now I only betrayed you further. Poirot's expression was gentle yet firm. You acted out of misplaced loyalty. You believed that by erasing the final piece of evidence and by securing the will you could end this saga. But justice requires transparency, not concealment. Jennings dropped the parchment. It fluttered to the carpet, revealing the original will's distinctive handwriting and seal. I bent to retrieve it, careful not to disturb the folds. Lady Eleanor moved forward, her gaze both sad and compassionate. Jennings, you have been like a brother to me, but trust cannot survive such secrecy. I forgive your intent, but I cannot excuse your means. The butler bowed deeply, tears in his eyes. I understand. Madam, I accept your judgment. Poirot stepped aside, allowing Lady Eleanor to secure the panel once more. Now, he said softly, we have recovered the will intact and the scrap too, albeit a fraction. Tomorrow, we shall restore every document to its rightful place, and no further harm can be done. He turned to me. Hastings, observe how guilt, when confronted, drives even the most faithful to deeds of desperation. Yet confession here in the study ensures the final piece falls into place. I nodded, still own heart pounding, as Lady Eleanor and Jennings left the room to alert the household. Poirot swept aside kisses of ash from the hearth, revealing the last charred fragment in all its telling detail. In this very spot, he said, laying the fragment beside the recovered will, we have the origin and conclusion of our labyrinthine mystery. The Bell's sabotage, the theft, the false leads, the psychological games all converged here. In this hidden panel and this fireplace, he paused, drawing a deep breath, mon ami. Tonight we dine with peace restored and papers recovered, and by dawn, all that remains is the final gathering where the last confession will be sealed and the true weight of human motives revealed. As we extinguished the study lamps and closed the door behind us, I realized how masterfully Poirot had orchestrated every twist, every confrontation, every desperate attempt to flee. The stage was set for the concluding act, one final moment when the little grey cells would fall upon the ultimate truth, leaving not a single secret unturned. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. Night had draped Brokestock Manor in velvet. Darkness, pierced only by the flicker of lantern light along its corridors. After Jennings's desperate retrieval in the study, the household moved with hushed purpose to restore order. Lady Eleanor stood in the library, reviewing the original will and its accompanying documents, while Sir Aldous and Lady Beatrice conferred quietly by the hearth, and Colonel Graves made final notes in his journal. I found Poirot seated at his desk, the small scrap of charred parchment displayed beneath the lamp's glow. He looked up as I approached. "Hastings," he said, "all our puzzle pieces lie before us now. The broken bell clapper, the waxed gloves, the counterfeit seal, the stolen will, and the charred note fragment. Each alone told a fragment of the tale. Together, they weave the full story." He tapped the scrap gently. "Let us reconstruct the chronology one final time." I set out a blank sheet and took notes as Poirot spoke, his voice measured and precise. First, the saboteur filed the bell's clapper over several nights, wearing gloves to avoid detection, a plan orchestrated by Sir Aldous, executed by Jennings. The purpose? To delay dinner and draw attention away from the study. He nodded to the fireplace. Second, during that delay, Sir Aldous, with Jennings's assistance, extracted the will from the hidden panel. He resealed the envelope with a counterfeit impression using candle wax, hoping to frame himself yet obscure the true architect of the crime. Poirot paused, swirling tea in his cup. Third, Madame Velez, enticed by Sir Aldous's promises, penned the menacing note to scare Lady Eleanor into urgency. She used her own stationery, hence the identifiable flourish, and attempted to destroy it in the hearth, leaving only our charred fragment. He laid the scrap beside the will. Fourth, Madame Velez's conscience led to her confession, clearing the way for the next act. He tapped the will. Fifth, Jennings, burdened by guilt, endeavored to erase the final scrap and restore the will's sole ownership to Lady Eleanor, an act of misguide. Devotion. He risked flight through the secret passage, but Poirot's vigilant watch ensured his capture. I glanced at the assembled group. Their faces reflected the weight of his words. Poirot rose and moved among them, speaking softly but firmly. "Now, let us consider motive in its purest form. Sir Aldous Winthrop believed himself the guardian of Lady Eleanor's estate. He feared external interference, lawyers, creditors, relatives. He convinced himself that only he could safeguard her legacy. Yet in pursuing that aim, he corrupted himself and those round him. Sir Aldous bowed his head. I see that now. Monsieur, my intentions were fatherly, but my means were dishonourable." Poirot turned to Madame Velez, seated near the window. Her head bowed. "Madame, you played the note to provoke fear, trusting Sir Aldous's assurances that it would secure Lady Eleanor's welfare. Your flaw was in substituting performance for a principle." She lifted her eyes and nodded. Lady Beatrice stood, addressing both. We all heard in silence, each withholding a truth that might have prevented this chain of events. "Let this night be our lesson in candor." Her gaze swept the others, igniting small sparks of mutual acknowledgement. Colonel Graves remained silent until Poirot addressed him directly. "Mon Colonel, you counsel restraint. Yet your own history with Lady Eleanor's father imbued you with a measured sternness. You reminded us that passion must be guided by principle, a principle that Sir Aldous set aside." The colonel inclined his head. "Indeed, passion without principle can become its own undoing." Poirot stepped back to the desk and spread the scrap, seal impressions, and clapper fragment before the group. "Behold the evidence of human frailty and redemption, each item a testament to choices made in fear, ambition, or misguided loyalty." He picked up the clapper fragment. "This broken piece once served to call the household together in harmony, yet its deliberate destruction symbolized the discord sown by fear. He laid it down and lifted the seal impressions. This counterfeit, stamping wax, bearing imitation intent, shows how appearances can deceive. The counterfeit seal seemed authoritative but crumbled under scrutiny. Finally, he tapped the charred scrap, and this bit of paper ignored by many, yet holding. The key to Madame Velez's truth teaches us that even the smallest detail can overturn the grandest deception. He folded his hands and faced Lady Eleanor. "Madame, with these revelations, your will stands validated, your trust restored, and the bell once more rings true. It remains only for you to decide the fates of those involved." Lady Eleanor stepped forward, her expression composed and radiant. "Monsieur Poirot, I am indebted to you for revealing not only the mechanics of these crimes, but the human hearts behind them. I forgive each one who acted out of devotion or fear, and I welcome their renewed allegiance." She turned to Sir Aldous. "Aldous, I know your heart better than anyone. Let us rebuild together, with honesty as our foundation." She then faced Madame Velez. "I understand your inspiration, Isidora. Yet I insist that true loyalty demands integrity beyond." Madame Velez curtsied deeply. "My lady, I shall honor that always." Lady Beatrice and Colonel Graves both offered solemn acknowledgments of the lessons learned. Jennings, appearing at the door with Miss Everett, bowed in respectful repentance, ready to atone under Lady Eleanor's mercy. Poirot smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "And now, Samus, let us proceed to dinner, this time with the bell's clear chime calling us to fellowship, not fear." The final piece has indeed fallen into place. As the group departed, I lingered to witness Poirot extinguish the lamp. The study fell into darkness, yet the clarity of his deduction shone brighter than any flame. In that moment, I felt the full circle of the mystery, from silent discord to triumphant resolution. Guided at every turn by the unerring precision of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 15. The final gathering by the time the guests reconvened in the great hall of Brookstock Manor. The candles had been replaced with fresh wicks, their flames steady and bright. The long table was gone, and in its place stood a semicircle of chairs facing the raised dais where the bell had once hung. Lady Eleanor, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown of soft lavender, took her place at the centre, flanked on her right by Sir Aldous Winthrop and on her left by Colonel Graves. Lady Beatrice Camden sat to Sir Aldous' right, and Madame Isidora Velez to Colonel Graves's left. Jennings and Miss Everett stood respectfully at the back, attendant but watchful. I stood beside Monsieur Poirot, whose posture betrayed only a quiet anticipation. The ancestors' portraits that lined the walls seemed to observe us with grave interest, as though their painted eyes followed our every movement. The air was thick with expectation. Tonight would not be a communal meal, but a tribunal of truth. Monsieur Poirot stepped forward onto the dais, clearing his throat gently, his appearance immaculate in a charcoal suit. Handkerchief neatly folded in his breast pocket lent him an air of serene authority. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, voice resonant in the vaulted hall, "you have all navigated a labyrinth of uncertainty and fear. Tonight, we gather one final time not to dine, but to witness the restoration of justice and the reaffirmation of trust." He paused, allowing his words to settle. Lady Eleanor's calm gaze met his, and he nodded once, subtly acknowledging her presence. "Let us recount the tapestry of events." Poirot motioned to the empty space where the bell once stood. First, the bell's clapper was deliberately filed and broken, delaying dinner and diverting attention. Second, a forged seal and threatening note sought to coerce concealment of the stolen will. Third, false trails were planted, gloves and footprints, red herrings and misdirection to implicate those whose motives, though genuine, were not criminal. He stepped down from the dais and circled the group slowly, pausing behind Sir Aldous. Sir Aldous, your financial concerns for Lady Eleanor's estate were understandable. Yet in orchestrating these events, you betrayed her trust and enlisted the loyalty of those you believed obedient. Poirot continued round the semicircle. Lady Beatrice, your withholding of the rasping sound and your silent fear lent inadvertent credence to the saboteur's plans, Colonel Graves. Your stoic reserve masked deep-seated resentment of Lady Eleanor's inheritance, Madame Velez. You lent your artistry to intimidation, mistaking performance for persuasion. He returned to the dais and raised his hand again. Yet none acted alone. The evidence broke in clapper fragments. Counterfeit wax impressions, charred notice scraps reveals. The interplay of motives and methods. In the crucible of deception, each of you played a part. He paused and let his gaze sweep slowly over the assembled faces. But tonight, we set those parts aright. Lady Eleanor's voice, gentle yet firm, rose from her place. Monsieur Poirot, this hall is the heart of Brookstock Manor. Here, the bell once gathered my family and friends in fellowship. I ask that its ringing once more echo truth and unity. Let us hear its clear tone, freed from the discord sown among. U.S. At her words, Poirot gestured to Jennings, who stepped forward and lifted the bell from its resting place. The polished brass gleamed under the candlelight, its surface unmarred by scratches or dents. Poirot offered a small wooden mallet to Lady Eleanor. With your consent, Madam, he said, you may strike the bell twice, once for remembrance of the past, and once for hope in the future. Lady Eleanor accepted the mallet, and for a moment the hall was silent, but for her measured breathing. She lifted the mallet and brought it down gently upon the bell's rim. The first peal rang out, a clear, resonant note that vibrated through the rafters. She paused, eyes glistening, and struck again. The second peal echoed with renewed strength, filling every corner of the chamber. A soft murmur rose among the guests as the sound faded. And Poirot smiled. There, Msamus, the bell's true voice restored. May it remind us that when trust is broken, it can be mended by honesty, compassion, and, above all, truth. He turned back to the group. Now, I invite you each to share, in one sentence, what you have learned from this ordeal. He began with Sir Aldous. Sir Aldous inclined his head and spoke, voice measured. I have learned that the noblest intentions can be corrupted by fear and secrecy, and that transparency is the surest safeguard of trust. Lady Beatrice took a shallow breath. I have learned that silence in the face of doubt can become complicity, and that courage to speak can prevent greater harm. Colonel Graves's tone was steady. I have learned that principle untempered by empathy can blind one to injustice, and that compassion must guide one's convictions, Madam. Velez smiled sadly. I have learned that power to influence through art can also wound, and that integrity must temper even the greatest talent. Jennings, his head bowed, spoke last. I have learned that loyalty without honesty is a false devotion, and that true service demands transparency. Poirot nodded approvingly. Well spoken. You see now how each of your actions, however unintended, contributed to the web of misdirection. He held up the charred scrap and the recovered will. But the most important lesson is this. No detail is too small, no truth too painful to be suppressed. It is by confronting our own motives that we emerge strong round together. He stepped back, folding his arms. Msamus, we have gathered tonight to witness the reconciliation of deed and intention. I trust that the future at Brookstock Manor will be marked by clear communication and steadfast loyalty. A gentle hush fell across the hall as the assembled group absorbed his words. Lady Eleanor rose, placing a hand on her chest. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, she said softly. for guiding us through darkness back into light." Poirot bowed deeply. "It has been my honor. Madam, now, let us retire to the dining room, where wine flows freely and fellowship may be renewed in earnest." He offered his arm to me. "Come, Hastings, our evening of resolution awaits." As we turned to leave the great hall, the final peals of the bell lingered a sonorous testament to restored trust and veiled truths, and the enduring power of Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 16. The revealed candlelight in the dining room of Brookstock Manor seemed to dance with newfound relief as the assembled company took their seats at the long table. Silver candlesticks gleamed. Crystal glasses awaited wine, and the aroma of roast venison and truffled potatoes filled the air. The earlier tension had given way to cautious camaraderie, but a final moment remained Poirot's reveal, the culmination of our labours. Monsieur Poirot stood at the head of the table, his back straight, moustaches immaculately poised. He held a slender letter open round emblem of his precision and smiled as he surveyed the room. "Msamus," he began, voice warm, "we have commemorated the restoration of the bell and learned from one another's errors. Yet before we partake in tonight's repast, I wish to illuminate the precise manner in which each thread of deception wove together and how, by following the little grey cells, we unravelled it." He tapped the edge of the letter opener lightly. "Let us begin with motive. Sir Aldous Winthrop feared that Lady Eleanor's inheritance, though generous, would attract unsavoury claimants' lawyers, distant relatives, and opportunists. His intention was to protect her interests. Yet he forgot that the sincerity of one's concern cannot sanctify dishonest means." Sir Aldous inclined his head, expression solemn. Poirot continued. "To divert suspicion from himself, Sir Aldous enlisted his trusted butler, Jennings, to sabotage the bell. The gradual filing of the clapper ensured no sudden fracture, and the missing bell delayed dinner, drawing attention away from the study." He paused to let this sink in. "Jennings, devoted to Lady Eleanor, believed he acted for her welfare, yet his loyalty blinded him to the morality of his task. He wore gloves to avoid detection, nicked a finger, hence the tiny bloodstain on the vestibule floor and the misplaced glove with wax residue." Jennings bowed his head. Poirot moved on, while the bell silenced fellowship in the house. Sir Aldous and Jennings extracted the final will from the hidden panel in the study. The seal required counterfeiting, and the envelope was resealed with impure candle wax, a subtle but telling detail. Candle wax, not sealing wax, failed to produce a crisp impression, betraying the forgery. He lifted the vials we had placed on the desk earlier. "Here is the pure sealing wax that Sir Aldous' own seal typically used, and here the candle wax of deception. Compare the clarity of the crest impressions. Note how the counterfeit lacks definition, a clue visible only." Under careful scrutiny, Poirot paused and swept his gaze to Lady Beatrice. Lady Beatrice Camden's role was unintentional yet significant. She heard rasping in the corridors but remained silent, fearing suspicion and gossip. Her omission lent credence to the saboteur's plan, allowing it to progress unchallenged. Lady Beatrice's expression was contrite. Poirot nodded gently and continued. "Next, the menacing note, 'Speak not of the bell, or all shall fall,' penned in Madame Velez's own hand, using the same stationery as a recital request. It was slipped under Lady Eleanor's door to amplify fear. The writer attempted to burn the evidence, but the charred scrap retained the unique flourish of her handwriting, our secret clue." He held the charred fragment aloft, a fragment no larger than an afterthought, yet impossible to overlook once compared to her invitation. A lesson, even the smallest detail, if examined closely, can reveal the grandest deception. Poirot set down the scrap and moved to Colonel Graves. Colonel Graves, though unconnected to the mechanics of the crimes, provided the stern moral compass that challenged us all. Your sense of duty and your disagreement with Lady Eleanor's father in India taught us that principle must be balanced with compassion, lest rigidity foster resentment. The colonel inclined his head, acknowledging the insight. Poirot turned back to the centre. Finally, after Madame Velez's confession and Sir Aldous' admission, it fell to Jennings guilt-ridden to attempt one last act, to remove the charred scrap from the hearth and restore the will in Seeker. Sigh, he emerged from the hidden panel at night, only to be intercepted by our vigil. He allowed a brief silence, eyes bright with triumph. Thus, each participant, actor, and accomplice played a vital role. Yet justice was served not by punishment alone, but by the restoration of truth and trust. Lady Eleanor's will is once again secure, her legacy intact, and the bell shouting not for fear, but for fellowship. Lady Eleanor rose from her seat, her face radiant. Monsieur Poirot, you have not only revealed the culprit, but reminded us of the power of truth. I shall remember this lesson always. Poirot bowed deeply. It has been my privilege. Madam, and now, if you will all forgive me, may I invite you to enjoy the fruits of the Manor's kitchen and to raise a glass to clarity of mind and unity of spirit. As goblets were filled with vintage claret and toasts exchanged, I caught Sir Aldous' eye. He nodded gratefully to Poirot. Lady Beatrice embraced Madame Velez, offering forgiveness. Colonel Graves raised his glass to Jennings with a respectful nod. The Manor's Hall, once a stage for secrecy and betrayal, now resonated with laughter and genuine warmth. And I knew then that the final reveal, Poirot's masterful dismantling of the plot, had done more than solve a mystery. It had healed wounds, restored faith, and underscored the enduring power of honesty. In the soft echo of clinking crystal, Brookstock Manor reclaimed its harmony. And Hercule Poirot's little grey cells once more proved that no deception, however intricate, can withstand the light of reason and the scrutiny of truth. Chapter 17. Outcome and justice. The morning after our final gathering dawned crisp and clear over Brookstock Manor. The tension that had so recently hovered in its halls had been replaced by a hopeful stillness, as if the house itself exhaled at last. I joined Lady Eleanor in the drawing-room, where she sat by the window, poring over the restored wool spread upon the small table before her. Jennings hovered nearby, polishing the silver frame of a family portrait he had once nearly forsaken, and Miss Everett straightened cushions on the settee with meticulous care. Sir Aldous Winthrop paced slowly in the adjacent gallery, and throughout the manor, the hum of servants preparing for a proper mid-morning repast testified to a household return to order. Monsieur Poirot entered, his gait as precise as ever, and carried in his hand a small leather docket. He approached Lady Eleanor, raising his eyebrows in inquiry. "Madam," he said softly, "the matters of last night have been settled to the letter end. I trust, to the spirit, I thought it prudent to review with you the outcomes and the measures of justice each participant shall face." Lady Eleanor looked up, her grey eyes steady yet compassionate. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot, I wish for a fairness tempered with mercy, for I believe in redemption as much as in accountability." Poirot inclined his head. "Very well. Let us begin with Sir Aldous Winthrop." He handed her the docket. "Sir Aldous has expressed profound remorse for his actions, acknowledging the harm wrought by his deceit. In light of his prior service to the family and his genuine contrition, I recommend the following. He shall relinquish any executorial duties over the estate and instead serve as Lady Eleanor's persona. Advisor bound by written covenant to uphold transparency. Furthermore, he will donate a portion of his fee for estate management to the Bell Fund, established to maintain and restore the manor's heritage. Lady Eleanor absorbed the proposal thoughtfully, then nodded. "I accept." These terms, Sir Aldous' expertise remains invaluable, but under these conditions, his role shall be one of counsel, not control. Poirot next turned to Jennings, who had entered quietly at the door, his uniform pristine yet his face drawn. "Jennings," Poirot said, "you served loyally for many years. But your complicity in the sabotage and theft cannot be overlooked. I propose that you receive a formal reprimand and forfeit 1 month's salary, with the understanding that you will undergo a probationary period during which all your actions and accounts will be sub judice. See toward it. During this time, you shall receive support from Miss Everett, who will oversee your duties and offer guidance in restitution." Jennings bowed his head. "Monsieur, Lady Eleanor, I accept fully. My greatest regret is the breach of trust. I shall devote myself to restoring it in every way possible." Miss Everett stepped forward, offering a gentle smile. "Jennings, we will work together, and I believe your heart will guide you rightly." The butler's eyes glistened with gratitude. Poirot then addressed Madame Velez, who stood nearby. Hands clasped. "Madame," he said, "though your role in penning the threat was serious, your swift confession and evident remorse weigh in your favor. I recommend you continue to perform here at Brookstock Manor, but under the condition that all performances be for charitable causes arranged by Lady Eleanor herself. This will transform your artistry from instrument of fear into gift of goodwill, madam." Velez bowed deeply. "It shall be as you wish, madam. I shall dedicate my next recital to the Bell Fund and to the memory of Lady Eleanor's beloved mother." Lady Beatrice watched the proceedings with tears brimming. Poirot turned to her. "Lady Beatrice, your vigilance faltered when you refrained from speaking of the rasping sound. Yet your courage in facing your own omissions is praiseworthy. I propose that you establish an annual scholarship for young artists in your friend's name and act of tea. Transparency and generosity that will honor your own professionalism and conscience." Lady Beatrice inhaled deeply, nodding. "I will create the Camden Carrington Scholarship for emerging performers, awarded each year in this hall." She offered a small, determined smile. Finally, Colonel Graves, who had listened in respectful silence, received Poirot's gaze. Moaned Colonel. "Your integrity served as a moral compass throughout. Your only restitution need be to mentor the cadets at your old regiment, emphasizing the balance of duty and compassion you so eloquently expressed here." The colonel inclined his head in acceptance. "I shall undertake that responsibility with honor." With each resolution agreed upon, Lady Eleanor's manner grew lighter still. As bonds of trust mended and constructive purpose replaced fear, Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "Msamas," he said, addressing the assembled household and guests. "Justice has been done not only in exposing the misdeeds, but in crafting outcomes that restore. Honor and purpose, each recommitment, each act of restitution ensures that the lessons learned shall endure." He turned to me, voice low. "Hastings, the final piece of justice is this, that all have been offered a path to redemption. True justice is not mere punishment, but restoration, much like repairing a bell that rings true once more." Lady Eleanor rose to her feet and rang the bell's mallet gently on its rim. The clear note rang through the drawing-room, a symbol of reconciled hearts and renewed fellowship. As the echoes faded, she addressed her guests and staff. "Thank you all for your cooperation and goodwill. Let us rebuild Brookstock Manor together, grounded in honesty, kindness, and mutual respect." In that moment, I saw the manor transformed, a place shaped not by schemes and fear, but by the harmony of community restored. Poirot's meticulous unraveling had culminated in outcomes that honored both justice and mercy, proving that human frailty, when met with compassion, can lead to profound renewal. And so, as servants carried trays of fresh tea and light sandwiches and As the once silent bell tolled again in measured cadence, the household of Brookstock Manor embarked on its new chapter, secure in the knowledge that integrity, like a finely tuned bell, must be tended with care to ensure it rings true for all time. Chapter 18. The closing remark. The evening air was cool as Lady Eleanor, Poirot, and I stood on the manor's front terrace, overlooking the gently rolling Sussex hills bathed in moonlight. The bell's clear tones still echoed faintly in our ears, a sonorous reminder of trials over command. Trust restored, Sir Aldous, Lady Beatrice, Colonel Graves, Madame Velez, Jennings, and Miss Everett had long since retired to their chambers or departed for home, each bound by renewed commitment to honour and fellowship. Now only the three of us remained, savouring the calm that follows resolution. Lady Eleanor inhaled the night air, the serene smile gracing her lips. Monsieur Poirot, my heart is lighter than it has been in many months. You have not only solved a perplexing crime, but you have guided us all to rediscover the best in ourselves. Poirot bowed slightly, his moustaches quivering in modest delight. Madam, the greatest mystery is of the human heart. It can falter under fear, but it can also rise in forgiveness. Your willingness to offer mercy sealed the true resolution of this affair. I leaned against the stone balustrade, gazing at the silvered fields below. It feels as though the manor itself has exhaled, the old shadows chased away by the bell's renewed song. Lady Eleanor nodded. Yes, and yet I shall never look upon that bell in quite the same way. I will hear in its tone both caution and hope. Poirot's eyes twinkled, a fitting lesson. Madam, for the bell signifies call and response, disturbance met by order, question answered by truth. In our case, questions abounded. But the little grey cells prevailed. He turned to me and tapped my elbow lightly. Hastings, do you recall how, at the outset, I said that the simplest question often holds the key? It was so with our clues, the wax and the scrap, the footprints and the seal. Each ordinary detail, when examined without prejudice, revealed an extraordinary truth. I smiled. Your lessons are as enduring as they are precise. Mon ami, Poirot drew a deep breath, then cast his gaze upon the moonlit grounds. I shall take my leave at dawn, madam, for the road beckons and other mysteries await. But before I go, a final remark. He placed his hand over his heart in his habitual gesture. Human nature is a labyrinth, at once tender and treacherous. Yet, when guided by honesty and a measure of kindness, even the darkest corridors lead back to light. Lady Eleanor reached out and touched his arm. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for illuminating both the manor's secrets and our own. He bowed, then raised his palm in farewell. And thank you, madam, for your trust. May Brookstock Manor flourish under your stewardship, its bell ever ringing true. With that, Poirot turned and strode down the path toward the carriage awaiting him, his silhouette, impeccably upright, melted into the moonlit mist with only the echo of his steps and the faint glint of his moustaches remaining. Lady Eleanor watched until he vanished, then sighed contentedly. He leaves us not merely with answers, but with wisdom. I offered her my arm. Come, madam, let us rejoin the hearth tomorrow. The world will awake to new challenges, but tonight we rest in the harmony we have won. Together, we return to the manor, its windows aglow with warmth and conversation. Behind us, the bell tolled once more to clearings, as if in salute to resolution achieved. In its echo lay the story's final lesson, that even when silence falls upon truth, the right voice will always prevail, and so Brookstock Manor embraced the promise of a new dawn, its legacy secure, its people united by the enduring power of reason, compassion, and the indomitable little grey cells of Hercule Poirot.